This took place around 2 years ago. I was driving to work, a 5-hour drive. It was already dark. About 3 hours of driving, and I started to get tired, so I bought myself a coffee and some snacks at a gas station, and I went on. But snacks and coffee can only keep you awake for so long, and I started to feel tired again. This part of the road was nothing but thick, dark pinewood forest around me, no other cars on the road, nothing, only insects smashing my windshield now and then, and an empty road. I was now extremely tired, and at one point I even nearly drove off the road, for almost falling asleep. I thought to myself that I have to sleep now and I can't wait for a gas station. I need to stop as soon as I see a place where I can park my car and just get something. When I'm tired too, I unfortunately fall asleep really fast. If I'm tired enough, I can fall asleep in the middle of a sentence even, when I'm talking, so it's a bit urgent for me to find a place where I can stop now. It felt like maybe an hour, but probably just like 5 minutes go by and I spot this little pocket in the road. It's like a parking space for quick stops, like peeing, switching drivers, or stuff like that, not even a real resting area. But I stopped here, turned down my windows to check if I heard any weird noises, and there was total silence. So I wound up my windows again. I thought to myself that nothing bad was going to happen. I haven't seen a car for like 30 minutes, in fact. The road is empty. And if someone is checking out my car, I bet it's the cops checking on me if I'm alright. So I leave my keys in the ignition and I lock the doors just to be safe. I adjust my seatbelt to make it more comfortable to sleep in, and I take off my shoes and I put them on the passenger seat on the right. And let me tell you that it was so nice to close my eyes and instantly I fall asleep. I don't know why, but something wakes me up. I can't really see anything. Some kind of bright light hits me in the eyes. At first I thought that it was a flashlight, but then I realized it was the high beams from another car in my rearview mirror that was blinding me. I look at my left mirror and I see a dude walking up beside my car. Maybe he wants help with something? Should I make it clear to him that I'm in here? He's right beside my left back door now. Should I step out and ask what he's doing? I didn't have to in the end because the dude proceeds to jerk and pull on my left back door. I almost crapped my pants when I realized that he's trying to force his way into my car. My seat is adjusted for me to lay down, and I push it back max. I can't reach the pedals, which makes it impossible for me to drive my car, but I slam the car horn, and it breaks the silence with a roar, and the dude jumps. And that gives me like 2 seconds to push my seat to reach the pedals, but it's still way out of adjustment, so I'm kind of pulling myself to the steering wheel because my seat is laying flat and isn't supporting my back. But anyway, I quickly start my car and I drive off with a cloud of smoke from my screeching tires. It's actually quite surprising just how hard it is driving a car with nothing holding up your upper body, but I managed and I got out of there. As I leave though, I look in the rearview mirror and I see how the dude stands there and just looks at me. And then I see 2 more guys coming up beside him. What I can make out too from the silhouette of their beams was that one of them has something in his hand, like a wrench or a crowbar or something. After that, I drove super fast, way over the speed limit. My whole body was trembling with adrenaline and fear, and I drove like that for like 30 minutes. Then I stopped at the gas station to fix my seat and put my shoes on again. I figured out too that I must have been only sleeping for like 10 minutes max. And well, after that, I didn't have to sleep until I got to my destination, which is surrounded by heavy-duty fencing, and the building has an alarm. I told my boss the next day as well, and he said that they actually have problems with what we call it in Sweden, road pirates. Criminals that force you to stop on the road and rob you of everything, including your car sometimes. And apparently, that specific area is known for it. I'm not saying that it was that. I mean, it could have just been 3 nice guys that wanted to check if I was okay. But then, why didn't they just knock on my driver's window? The thing in his hand could have just been a big flashlight, I suppose, but still, I think I dodged a bullet with that one. A few months back, I went on a date with a guy who seemed familiar to me, but I just couldn't put my finger on where I'd seen him before. I assumed that I might have met him on a night out or something. It was a last-minute thing, though, and I told him how I wasn't looking for anything, but it would be nice to hang out. And that was a mistake. When I met him, at first he seemed like an alright guy, but things quickly turned when we got to a restaurant. He didn't order, but I did, and he started saying things about loving my curves and my body. I laughed it off, but I thought that he was being a bit too forward. He could have put it nicely or kept that to himself. While having my food, he began telling me about how I was different from other girls because they don't give nice guys like him a chance. Red flags were immediately going off, so I came up with a story that I could only be out for a little bit because my parents wanted me to dog sit and stuff like that. He bought it, but then proceeded to stare at my breasts and say things about how he wished he could see me without clothes on, even saying that I should send him a picture. I told him that I don't do that and that he was making me uncomfortable. He stopped, but then told me how he brought me a gift. He pulled out of his bag a bouquet of roses, which I did think was actually quite sweet, and a bag of Tesco prawns. That confused me, and honestly, I just kind of burst out laughing. I asked why he got them, and he said that he knew that I liked tempura and prawns. But the thing is that I never once told him that I did, so alarm bells were definitely going off again. My head was now telling me to run, but I didn't want to be rude, so I stayed until the time that I said I would, and after that I left. So I had less than an hour left. He kept talking too, but he actually started to scare me because he started guessing aspects of my life, like uncannily, like the school that I went to, what I was like as a kid, what I'm currently doing. He just got every part right. It scared me because, well, I haven't told him any of this and I haven't posted any of this online, so I backed away and asked him how he knew all of that. And it turns out that his mother was actually one of my teachers in school, and he asked her everything that she knew about me and looked online for anything about me currently. I don't know when he asked her, but at this point, I definitely wanted to get out of there, and thank God for my mum. Not long after, I got a text from my mum asking how things were. He didn't see the text but saw that it was my mum, and I just said, "Oh my goodness, my mum and dad got the times wrong for the pictures, so I have to go home now for my dog. I'm so sorry." The guy just accepted that and then started to walk me home. I said something about only going about halfway because I'm not comfortable with people knowing where I stay, but he then started insisting. And he then dropped the bombshell that he knew that I stayed on X Road, but didn't know which house was mine. I told him that that was really weird and that it creeped me out that he knew that. He claimed that I told him, but I never tell people that. So I started to walk to the main road for my own safety, but he then grabbed my hand and said that he knew a shortcut. I was getting really scared when he stopped and shoved his tongue down my throat. I shoved him away and told him to stop it, and he apologized. That's when I noticed a stranger walking a dog coming, so I used that as an opportunity and said that I needed to go, and I went to the main road. I thought that I was safe, honestly, but I wasn't. The guy kept walking with me, and I stopped and told him that I wanted to part ways here and how it was nice to meet him again. He then looked confused and said that we had never met. He said something about meeting on a night out just to get me to come with him, and I then began saying, "Look, I have to go," when he cut me off, grabbed me and pulled me near some bushes saying, "Before you go, there's one more thing." I told him that I needed to go and to let go of me, but he just ignored me. The guy then pulled me in, hurting my wrists, and kissed me again. He saw the bushes and said about having privacy, and I managed to shove him off and tell him no. He then grabbed me again and tried to take me to the bushes, saying it'll only take a second, while I resisted. Some dog walkers came by and he stopped and pulled me to kiss me again, but this time he grabbed my breast and I shoved and screamed. I said no and just ran. My heart was racing and I was terrified. I thought that he might have tried to do something to me. I kept looking back, but he was nowhere to be seen. I ended up taking the long way home just in case that night. And when I got in, I just started to cry because I thought something bad was going to happen to me when I got a message from another account because it was him. He said about how lovely it was meeting me and how it was the best date ever, how I was the prettiest girl that he'd ever kissed and that he would love to see me again, adding how he hoped that I had a lovely time too and that he showed that he was a gentleman, then adding that he was now on my road. I just hit on the floor for the rest of the day after that, and when I looked at his profile, I actually remembered where I'd seen him before at that moment. He used to message my old Facebook account years ago with weird messages and creepy edits saying how he liked me. This whole event happened within an hour and a half, but boy, did it feel a lot longer than that. So I was vacuuming my house at 9:30 p.m. with my music playing when I get a knock on my door. My boyfriend was at work and I was not expecting company, especially so late at night. So I turned my music down and realized that the door is actually not locked. Instantly, I'm terrified. I mean, I'm only 4'10", so I had to prop myself up to the wall to look through the peephole, and I carefully locked the door. More pounding, and the man outside my door is no one that I recognize, and looks kind of disgruntled, dirty, and quite frightening. He was short and stocky and looked angry. He grew frustrated knowing that I'd just turned my music down. He heard me lock the door and started calling out, "Ma'am," more knocking, "Excuse me, ma'am." But how did he know that I was a woman? I looked around the room and see my blinds were open and realized that he must have been watching me vacuum. Thankfully, my neighbors right across from me opened their doors, and the husband asked, "Hey, excuse me, who are you and what are you doing?" Startled now, the creep fumbles and says, "Oh, good evening, sir. I was just going to offer my carpet cleaning services to her." The husband goes, "That's great, buddy. She doesn't want it. You need to leave, right now." And the creep left promptly. Afterwards, I called the police, my boyfriend, and closed up my blinds and texted the neighbors to thank them for scaring him away. I paid extra to live on the top floor as well, but it seems that this creep must have been watching me from below. This story takes place during my senior year of high school when I still lived at home with my mum. It was a Saturday, so I slept in as any teenager does, and my mum, she left for work early that morning, so I spent my day at home alone. I decided to do some cleaning around the house when I realized that we were out of paper towels, so I went down to the garage to get them. That's where we kept extra things. My mum lives in a 3-story townhouse where the main floor is actually on the second floor, and the first floor is just a small entryway at the bottom of the stairs and 2 doors. One of them is the front door and the other leads to the garage. So I walked down the stairs and opened the door to the garage, going to flip on the lights, but realizing that I didn't need to, because the garage door was wide open and letting in a lot of daylight. Now, maybe to some this would be no big deal, but my mum lives in a not great part of town and is adamant about closing the garage door when she leaves. I remember feeling weird too about it, since it was so unusual, but chalked it up to my mum just not realizing it, or maybe something had rolled under the door, so the automatic sensor kept it from closing completely, and she drove away without realizing. I looked over into the dark corner of the garage where the boxes were stacked and the paper towels were stored. For some reason, I couldn't get myself to walk over there and grab them. I do have a slight fear of the dark, so I figured that that was what was causing my sudden hesitation. So I just kind of stood there in the doorway and pressed the garage door button on the wall and watched it close completely. I made sure nothing blocked it from closing, and I waited a good 10 seconds before leaving to make sure that it was really shut this time. I switched off the light, walked back inside, and locked the garage door. I took maybe 2 steps up the stairs before I heard boxes trembling and scuffling of feet, and the audible sound of someone hitting their hand against the garage door opener, and then the mechanical sound of the garage door opening. And at that, I noped it up the rest of the flight of stairs, then just stood at the top step for probably 20 minutes, just kind of shaking. It wasn't until my mum got home asking me why the garage door was open that I went back down there. And other than my mum's car now in the garage, it was completely empty. except for the boxes in the corner where we store extra things for the house. I looked and saw that the boxes were toppled over. I had to explain to my mum the situation, and I'm so glad that my gut told me not to go into that dark corner of my garage, and to whoever decided to creep in there, please never come back. So when I was 13, I had not long broken up with this girl who supposedly had a psycho family. One of this girl's family was a close friend who was supposedly obsessed with her. I was invited out with my friends after school one day, and this boy latched on. Everybody told me to come out and that he wanted to make amends and he understood why I did what I did, etc., etc. Being the pushover that I am, I went out and we hung out in the parks and smoked and drank and whatnot. As it started to get dark, I decided to go home, and I felt uneasy about being around him, and he started acting all weird, talking about fights that he'd been in, and bragging about bashing some guy's face in with his fist in school. And so, because I didn't feel safe whatsoever, I just left. Now, the next day, my best friend and all the other kids that were out that night came into school and told me that it got worse after I left. Apparently, after they had drunk some more, he started waving this huge kitchen knife around. It was telling everybody how he was going to stab me in the stomach for breaking that girl's heart. Now, let me point out too that I only know the details of this because I have a relative in the local police force. In the end, my dad made us move too because he actually knew where I lived. I continued getting death threats on social media though until about a year or two later when it was in the paper. It was spread around town that he had broken into somebody's house and stabbed a man to death and then slit his wrists in the man's bathtub. They found high amounts of cocaine and cannabis in his system, along with a lot of alcohol. The elderly neighbors phoned the police when they heard some commotion and they hadn't seen the man leave for work that day. And they found him barely conscious and he's now in a psych ward. This was also supposedly over this girl again. Anyway, I think that I dodged a big bullet there. I have a handful of little encounters that I just can't explain, starting from when I was around 7. So, the earliest one I can remember is waking up in the middle of the night and seeing a rapidly fading hand on my shoulder. I remember feeling something heavy on my shoulder, and when I turned around, I saw the faint image of a hand resting on my shoulder as though someone was actually standing behind me, even though I was laying on my back. I turned my bedside lamp on, and I sat up staring around my room for a long time before eventually just falling asleep with the light on. The next one was about a year or so later, I think, maybe more, I can't be sure, but I was lying in bed trying to sleep, and I remember feeling something tugging at my blanket from the foot of my bed. It was hard enough too that I kept sitting up and turning my lamp on to see if anyone was there. I even looked under my bed at one point. After I'd sat up for about half an hour staring at the end of my bed, I laid back down, and as soon as I did, as I turned the light off, I felt the tug again. I woke my dad up, and he slept in my bed that night while I slept next to my mum, and he said that he slept fine. The next one, nothing physically happened, but for some reason I just couldn't shake the feeling like I felt like someone was in my room. The room just seemed small and dense and crowded, even though I was the only one in it. It bothered me enough too that I told my mum, and she smudged my room and sat with me for a while. The next was about a week after that. It was a warm night, so I had my window open, and I woke up and there were just a lot of flies in my room, so I got up and closed my window, and when I sat back on my bed, the window was a little bit open again. I stared at it in case it moved again, and it actually started to move open again on its own. It moved up another inch or so by itself, and at that point, I ran out of my room and slept next to my parents. After that one too, things started to pick up a little. I had a big plush wolf that my brother actually won at a fair at one point, and it sat in my room against the wall farthest from my bed, a good 6 feet or so away. I woke up one morning at dawn, and the wolf was now at the foot of my bed. When I was laying down too, I could just see its beady little eyes poking over the top of the quilt, and I still don't know how it moved across my room like that, but it scared me so bad that my mum gave it to Goodwill that afternoon because she just refused to have it in the house. Another time too, I was sleeping on the couch in the living room while my mum was busy with something. I slept there for 3 days, and every night I would feel someone walking past me. I pretended to be asleep, but I narrowly opened my eyes and could never see anyone, even though I'm sure that I could feel someone there. But one night, the video recorder kept turning on by itself too, and I'd turn it back off and it would turn back on again. But the last thing I encountered was another sleep one, and it was when I was about 19. I still remember the dream too, because I was walking home from my elementary school and was being followed by someone, but they were always just too far away to make out any features. I made it back to my house and nobody was home. In my dream, I laid down on the couch and then the whole house was just engulfed in flames, and the guy who followed me home was standing in the fire. I woke up really abruptly to this, and I saw the head and shoulders of an oldish man standing over my bed. It took maybe 15 seconds or so before it faded, but it was vivid enough that I actually said, "Who's there?" out loud. I know that it wasn't sleep paralysis too, because I could definitely move. Nothing ever happened after that, and I've moved out now. A few years after I moved out, though, they pulled up the carpet in my brother's room and found what looked like the ruins of a wine cellar under a trapdoor in the floor. But it had a little box of curious things from the 50s and the 60s in it, and some scraps of comic strips like it was used as a cubby at some point. Anyway, I never found any more information on it, but I'll never forget those nights that I was living there. So this happened when I was in high school several decades ago. At the time, I had zero interest in anything paranormal. I was heavy into science and all things logical, really. And anyway, in the 11th grade, I switched high schools to one closer to home. On the second or third day there, a student walked up to me that I didn't know and introduced himself. I was new and he was cool to me, so we made friends right away. So we started hanging out, me and his other friend, who was also a nice guy. We were kids just doing normal teenager stuff, but one evening while hanging out at my friend's house and listening to some music, he told me that he knew that I was coming to their school. Intrigued, I asked how he knew that, and he said that their Ouija board told them that I was coming. I asked how long ago I'd told them that, and even though I don't remember his exact reply, I remember that it was longer than even I knew that I was going to change schools, which was odd. But naturally, I'm in complete disbelief about any of this Ouija board nonsense, and even told him that. So, him and his friend pulled it out and started using it in front of me. Now, understand that they're sitting on this bed using it, I'm on the other side of the room sitting down, and he asks me to ask it something. So, determined to show them just how silly this Ouija board nonsense was, I began asking it questions that these two would absolutely have no way of knowing. They were deeply specific things about my family, dates, names, places, etc. This was before the internet as well, and these were just normal teenagers like myself, so I know that they didn't know this information. Since I wasn't even close to it and they were the ones touching it, I thought that I would totally trip it up. But, to my astonishment, it actually answered every single question that I posed to it with 100% accuracy, which, let me tell you, was absolutely impossible. My friends kept looking up at me when it would answer to gauge my reaction, and I remember getting goosebumps just all over my body. I couldn't believe that this was actually happening, but somehow there was something behind that device that knew just all that stuff about me. To this day, I still wonder about it, and what it was, how it knew, especially how it knew that I would change schools before even I did. To this day, I still won't allow one in my house. I don't know what force is behind them, but I think it's for the best to just leave them alone. This happened about a week ago. I was going to a gothic fair in a place that I didn't really know well, but it was in my city, so I thought that I was going to be okay. Now, for context, yes, I'm a 20-year-old woman walking alone. Sounds like an easy target, I know, but this happened at 4 p.m. in the middle of summer. It was broad daylight, and even though it wasn't crowded, there were definitely people around. So I got out of the subway and I started checking my phone for directions, but I quickly put it away in my bag so I don't look distracted or get it taken from my hands and stuff. I had actually had a phone stolen that way before. I started walking while checking the street names and numbers when a couple, and they must have been around 35 years old, approached me and asked for directions. I told them that I was lost too, and they said that they weren't from here either and asked where I lived. I'm not stupid, so I gave them some sort of a vague answer and then I left. But 2 minutes after that, they approached me again and told me where the fair that I was going to was located, and I said thanks and I started walking that way. As I walked, they followed me and tried to start a conversation. I tried to walk faster and leave them behind because I don't trust strangers, but they just kept going with me. At some point too, the conversation, it was only the man talking to me, shifted to jobs and occupations, and the man said, I do have a job, but most of the time it isn't enough, so I have to do what I do. Usually I'm not violent, but I have a gun to use with dumb people who scream or make a scene. And then said, now show me if you value more your life or material things. He obviously expected me to hand my bag over, and I know that this is going to sound so edgy, but I'm deeply depressed and my train of thought went straight to, I either hand over my hard-worked for money that I was excited to spend in nice things today, or I finally die. I acted calm, although my heart was beating fast and I was sweating. I didn't scream, I didn't hand over my stuff either, and instead I just took my bottle of water and took a sip, and then I just kept walking, thinking that it wouldn't be all too bad to get shot and die there. And they just kind of stood there confused, and after a while they left. In the end too, I ended up going to the fair and I had a nice time. So I used to live in the southwest corner of Missouri in an old railroad town that had quite a few missing people here and there, mostly due to a high tweaker population. I lived in what we called a holler, at the bottom of the tops of two enormous hills. A creek also ran through the holler, but was mostly dry throughout the year. Despite it being dry though, living in what was basically a ravine makes the land and the hills damp and also misty, which meant that the woods surrounding our trailer were perpetually green year-round and also thick. You could walk in one direction for 10 minutes and get lost pretty easily. Generally speaking, we kids used the creek bed for a path, as there were flat rocks along it that were easier to navigate than the viney, lush forest floor. Now one day in the middle of summer, I decided to go for a walk in the woods. As usual, our red-nosed pit bull, Fatty, came along, and the sun would be setting soon, but I was home alone a lot of that time, so there was no one around to tell me not to go. I figured that I had enough time before sunset to walk a certain point and back. It was 7:30, and the sun set around 9 at that point in the summer. But the minute that I started trekking it throughout the creek bed, my pit bull started whining really weirdly. He didn't leave my side once, but was definitely reluctant to follow, stopping here and there to smell the air, looking behind us, and I figured that maybe there was an animal in the area, so I didn't worry too much. There was a point in the creek bed, though, that I had to duck under two fallen trees. It made a sort of bridge in the middle of the creek and acted as a turnaround point for most of my walks. My dog was still whining, and I began to wonder if there was a cougar or even a bear in the area, but for some reason I wanted to just keep walking. I ducked under the trees, shushed Fatty, and stopped to listen to the woods surrounding us. I heard nothing. I heard literally nothing. No wind, no snapping twigs, not even any birds, which was kind of weird. Even on calm days with no wind, those woods were usually teeming with sounds of life. And nothing was ever still, but all of a sudden, now it was. It also made my stomach feel like I was dropping down into a pit. Then I began to feel really weird. I can't really describe it, but it was kind of a gut feeling, when suddenly my body felt very queasy and oversensitive. And worse, I had the distinct feeling that now I was being watched. I have felt similar feelings when being watched by a bear at some point, and it's always really weird, but something just tells you to get the hell out of Dodge when there's a huge animal nearby. Humans are animals after all, and we also get those instincts. And every time that I'd experienced an animal that could potentially hurt me in the woods, I'd immediately turned around and gone home. My dog had always alerted me by barking or growling, but for some reason, not this time. Instead, Fatty was scared and trembling. Now, I'd seen this dog get hit by a truck before and get up like nothing had happened, and this time, he was terrified. All signs were pointing to leaving, right? But no, another weird thing happened. Call it an edgy teenager or anything you want, but I felt this strange pull into the woods. There was no sound, but I felt like something was calling me, luring me deeper into the woods. It was the worst part of that day, and also the creepiest thing that I'd ever felt. But I was also curious, so I wanted to know what the hell wanted me to wander further ahead. I walked forward, aware that my dog had firmly planted himself at the fallen trees. He was shaking all over and yelped at me as I walked away, but he didn't come with me. He also didn't leave, which I believe potentially saved my ass that day. But I left Fatty behind and eventually got to the part of the creek that I'd never been to. It was a clearing with a ring of trees surrounding it, with the creek stretching far ahead and going around an unseen corner. The sun hadn't moved and it was still silent. I stood in place for maybe a minute, I think, and considered turning around. The clearing was creepy and felt kind of devoid of everything. I can't really explain it well enough, but I felt like if I walked around that corner, which was about 100 feet away, that something terrible was about to happen. It felt like something was just waiting for me to walk into it, unsuspecting. In the end, I brushed it off as paranoia. I mean, I had plenty of sunlight left, and I could explore alone for once, and besides, if something was drawing me further in, then it's also possible that I might find something amazing. So I took a couple of more steps, and suddenly, I heard my dog yelping frantically behind me. Startled, I turned around quickly, my dog looking like a little white speck far back into the trees. He was pacing back and forth at his spot and barking like it was going to kill him if he didn't take off running. He kept lunging forward, but wouldn't move any distance forward. That was when I realized that something was just very wrong. I turned around again to look back at the clearing, and all of a sudden, it was pitch black outside. Like seconds ago, the sun wasn't even close to going down below the horizon, and all of a sudden, now the stars were out. No sun, no light. I stared hard at the trees around the corner, seeing nothing but elongated shadows. I heard a twig snap when all of a sudden my ears just started to ring, and panic flooded my entire body. I whipped around and shot back towards the fallen trees, sprinting towards my dog. He was snarling and barking like mad, and when I ducked under the trees, both of us sprinted back towards the house. The entire time, I honestly felt like death was on my heels, and Fatty never once ran ahead of me, staying right at my side the entire way back. When we eventually made it back home, I quickly checked the clock, and during the walk that usually took about 10 minutes, I would say, I had been gone for 3 hours. I'd left my home at 7:30, and now it was 10:30, which meant that my parents were due home in an hour. The next day, I walked only part way back to where I could see the clearing. The very farthest that I could walk was about 2 miles, and so that meant that it took me 3 hours to walk there and back. To this day, I have never felt so prowled upon in the woods as well. These woods weren't part of a national park or anything, but if you walked about 10 miles or so, you could reach Mark Twain National Park. And people go missing there quite often, seeing as the woods can be impossible to navigate after dark, and it has large hollows in the middle of the woods that people go rolling into, and they get stuck as well. I don't know what wanted me in that woods that day. I didn't see what it was, and it didn't say anything, but I ignored every natural instinct that I had to run until it was almost too late. My dog being there may have just been the reason, too, that I didn't wander deeper into the woods of the Missouri and succumb to someone or something in that dark place. I've never told anyone in my walking life about this, and what do you guys think? Have any of you guys heard of the 411 cases involving Missouri woods and hollers and whatnot? Or do any of you guys have any similar experiences if you're from this area? Just down the road from where, a few years ago, I had previously lived, in southeast Australia, is the opening into about 100 acres of woodland and bush that I frequently went into when I was younger to do the usual things like riding and camping. Now, I was out driving at around 11:30 p.m. with my girlfriend, and as we were in the area, decided to show her the woodlands while we were in the area, as she loves everything to do with nature, and it was summer, so an extremely warm night. I left my car with the light shining into the trees as we weren't going too far in, and it was pitch black inside, and the two of us just kind of sat chatting anyway, having a smoke and generally relaxing. She was sitting on a sort of map of the area that had been put into some plastic, and I was keeping an eye on the trees as, for some reason, I had a feeling that something was just not quite right. I've heard a few people say that they felt that they were in danger, although nothing around them was off, and it was kind of like that feeling. Every sense was almost reaching out, and my adrenaline was up, but there wasn't really anything in my eyeline that seemed any different. After lighting another cigarette to calm my nerves, I scanned the tree line again and realized that it looked different to before. It was only after staring in the dark that I saw that there was moonlight now lighting up the grass where it couldn't before, as there was a black shape blocking it that before I thought was a tree. Now, the only way I can describe the next part is that all the sound just kind of ceased and everything, and I mean literally everything, went dead silent. And a few seconds later, this disgusting feeling of dread just fell over me, and I saw motion in the dark of the path as this thing crawled toward us on all fours. Now, I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and I can assure you that we don't have any large predators like in the US or Europe, but somehow I knew that this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding itself from us, but was just kind of slowly crawling towards us. I don't know if my girlfriend saw it or not, as I couldn't look away, but just as it reached the line where my car lights were able to illuminate, it reared up onto two legs and just sat there, staring at us. So I'm 6'4", but this thing was about another meter larger than me at least, with arms that were just far too long that reached down near the ground, and all I could make out was a sort of off-white, almost yellowish fur on it, and in the dim light could make out the silhouette of its head as like a dog or a wolf maybe. I wasn't able to move as it stared at me, but it was at this point that my girlfriend gasped, which seemed to break whatever was stopping me from thinking logically. I grabbed her by the arm and we sprinted to my car, slammed the doors and tore out of there as fast as I could, both of us too scared to speak until about a half an hour later. We've both discussed it many times, and the feeling that we had was what I imagine a rabbit sees when it catches a wolf or a fox looking at it. That this is something that would be able to end us with absolute ease if it chose to. Neither of us have been able to come up with any explanation for what it was, but it's definitely changed the way that I view the woods and the bush here, and when I go camping or hiking now, I think back to that and wonder what it was, and if I'll ever see anything like it again. So, it's been about a year since my last story, I suppose, and I visit this place every now and then to listen to other people's stories, but haven't had much interest in contributing any of my own. But the stories that I have shared were mainly for entertainment. What I mean is that I could recount the events with ease because they virtually meant nothing to me. Just interesting stories to tell, you know? However, What I'm about to share is not something many of my closest friends or even family know about. The events that happened to me were, well, traumatic. The effects have cemented in the way that I think, view people, and my ability to trust or lack thereof. I'm afraid to admit that this is not a story in which I showed immense courage or resilience or anything. Instead, I just kind of buried these memories deep until recently. This is a pretty messed up encounter story that is about a truly sick man. The kind you hear about on TV or podcasts or something. The kind of evil man who managed to build something of himself despite his unnatural desires, only to use his wealth and resources to further manipulate and take advantage of kids. So, a little bit of background. I grew up in a very poor part of New England, a Hispanic-dominated area. The city is pretty small and has always been a conundrum to me, really. The city is known for its drugs use and violence. It was once a prospering mill city, one where immigrants came to work and secure their own slice of the American dream. The city and much of its residents have since disintegrated like the stones that make up the massive factories that loom over the city. The conundrum I speak of is while this city remains open to high criminal activity, the surrounding towns are just doing great. Less than 10 miles north, you enter New Hampshire, where things are generally quiet, and south you'll pass through multiple rich and thriving towns. And the man that I'll introduce later would come down from New Hampshire to prey on the poor kids from my community. So, I was maybe 13 years old, I think. It was definitely summertime because I remember the heat. It was a fun summer though. My friends and I were outside all the time, and while none of us had a car, we made the most of walking where we needed to go, and I was a bit younger than the guys that I was hanging out with at the time, so they were always able to kind of stay out later than me. It's funny how everything that happens while you're not there feels like you've missed out on the best stuff. Anyway, one day while we're all just kind of hanging around, a friend of mine mentions, "Hey, maybe we can get Ryan to come by and buy us some food." Always feeling left out, I acted as if I knew who Ryan was, the whole time thinking that he was a teenager, perhaps in his early 20s, I suppose. I let the conversation go on for a bit before I could not resist, and I asked, "Who's Ryan?" The response I got drove me crazy because it only furthered my frustration of not totally feeling like I was a part of the gang. "You don't know who Ryan is? We've been working for him for a few weeks now. He owns a junkyard and we go and strip cars, log spare parts, and just mess around, really. We get him to buy us stuff and he lets us drive his cars." I thought, how could this be? I felt so embarrassed and betrayed that all my friends apparently had a job and were going out to eat and drive cars, and I was just finding out about it. So, wanting to fit in, I urged them to get me a job too. My friend Eli, a leading figure in our group, pulls out his cell phone and gives this Ryan guy a call. The way Eli was talking to him made it seem like Eli was in control, like he was bullying Ryan or something. He spoke to him aggressively and told him that we were hungry and for him to come and pick us up and buy us some food. And Ryan agreed. Shortly after this, the man pulls up in his red pickup with a tow in the back and his company logo on the side of the truck. He was a white man, mid-40s, short and kind of chubby. He had a high-pitched voice that screeched out when he would laugh. And when he arrived, he immediately turned to Eli and started talking shit to him, making fun of him, letting out a bit of a laugh. It weirdly made me feel at ease too, because it just wasn't the way I expected an adult to act. It was kind of like he was one of us and you were in if you were cool with him. Eli introduced me to him and told him that I want to work. He examined me and asked if I knew anything about cars. I told him that I did, and he agreed that we'd talk about it over lunch. He told us all to jump into his truck and asked me to sit in the front seat so that we could talk. I remember that drive like it was yesterday. We were listening to the radio, and I could see that it was singing underneath his breath, so I purposely started singing the song out loud, acting as if I didn't know that he was also singing. He noticed and turned the music up, looked at me, and started singing loudly. We did this the whole ride until arriving at an Italian place, and the food was amazing. I had only ever been out to eat a handful of times at this stage, and none of them were with friends, ordering whatever we wanted and goofing off the whole time. It was a real treat and only really made me want to be in with Ryan even more. It was clear that he played favorites and those who he liked received more gifts. And at the end of lunch, he agreed to give me a job and made Eli agree to let me know the next time that we had to work. The next month or so felt like I was having the best summer of my life. Ryan owned a junkyard in New Hampshire and also had a car rental service. He was expanding his business, so there was a ton of construction going on. His office was in a construction trailer outside the yard. This is where you would find him if you needed anything. He would pick us up in the morning and bring us to the yard, and for 8 hours we would honestly just kind of mess around. We'd walk to the very end of the yard and hide out in cars. We would take naps and scavenge through the hundreds of cars hoping to find valuables, and occasionally we would actually have to work, but even then we would mess around a lot. And all the while, we were getting paid. Not a ton in retrospect, but more than any of us had ever received. But more than the pay, what we really wanted was our own car. He easily had 30 of them, not including the cars that he rented. Each car was in fair shape, and each day he would throw Eli a different set of keys, and it really made the rest of us jealous. You see, Ryan didn't really care if you had a license or not, and Eli didn't, and he drove a different car pretty much every day. I personally had my eye on a Mazda sedan. I wanted the car so bad when I approached Ryan that I nearly begged him for it. He agreed that we would talk about it at the end of the day, and I spent the whole day just kind of imagining my life with that car, how cool I would look, pulling up to places, getting girls' attention, and a car at the time was like entering a new world, and I just might have one at the end of the day. The end of the day came, and he threw Eli some keys and told him to bring everyone home except for me. This wasn't alarming to anyone because all I could think about the whole day was how he was going to give me that car. After everyone left and the sun was setting, Ryan asked me to talk in his trailer. He started with how kids are always coming and going, trying to take advantage of him, stealing from him, and explaining how ungrateful people are to his generosity. And I strangely felt like he was speaking about me, but kind of indirectly. He asked me a lot of questions about drug use. Are you on drugs? Have you ever taken any? How do I know that I can trust you? How do I know if you'll pay me back and just not ruin my car and never give me a dime? My response to all of it was no, I would thoroughly work off what I owed for the car, and he then asked if I had anything in my pockets. I said no and willingly turned them out, and then he said, "Do you really think that I'm that stupid? Like you would hide stuff in your pockets? I know that you're hiding things in your clothes." I had no warning bells ringing because a lot of what he was saying was true. We all stole from him, whatever we could, whenever we could get away with it. We all thought that we were in control and kind of using it. It's an amazing thing how someone can get you to do something and to do it on your own accord. I feel like it was your idea. No matter what I said, though, he just kept repeating, "I know you have something, I know you do." Ensuring him that I don't, I would move my shirt around and pull on my waistband. It wasn't taking. He just kept repeating that he doesn't make deals with thieves. And then I got the idea, painfully in retrospect, that I'll just take my stuff off, show this guy that I don't have anything. So, standing there with most of my stuff off at this point, I took off my pants and I stood there in triumph thinking, you see, I don't have anything. With only my boxers on, I started to kind of jokingly dance because I thought that I had won. I don't have anything after all. But then Ryan said, "Take off your boxers." I was really confused by this, and I was like, "What? I don't have anything. Why does this guy not believe me?" Ryan just sat behind his desk and told me again to take my boxers off, and I was frozen. And even though I hadn't said the words, I knew that I was alone at this point, far away from home, and confusion just took over my mind. I didn't have any thoughts really, just kind of frozen, and he leaned forward and said, "Are you going to make me go over there and take them off for you?" It's weird how I still did not think that I was being taken advantage of. Honestly, my brain still thought that this guy really thinks that I stole something. And I actually remember thinking to myself, what the fuck could I hide in my boxes? I said to him again that I don't have anything, and, well, he completely dropped the whole stealing bit. And then just said straight out, I want to see your dick. Pull it out. At this point, I didn't know what to do. It really sucks that you don't have any options to freeze time, actually think about what's happening, and instead, you're forced to make a choice, as fast as you can choose the words while having a conversation. My brain went into survival mode though, and that mode was to not look at the situation for what it actually was. I did what he asked, choosing to believe that it wasn't a big deal. He just sat there and looked at me, and honestly, thank God that that's all that he did. I began to shake, and I grabbed my clothes, and he snapped out of whatever world that he was in and started moving things around on his desk, looking in drawers, and I couldn't meet his eyes because I was ashamed and confused. He eventually spoke and said something like, "Don't crash it," as he threw the keys to the Mazda. I caught the keys and left, trying really hard not to think about what had just happened. I didn't want to face it, and that's why when I got home, I just chose not to say anything. My father, who I am sure would have killed him, I was embarrassed to tell him. Knowing he would think, why would you do that? Why didn't you fight? I raised you to be tough. Why would you do that? And so in the end, I just showed up like any other night, except this time, I had my own car. Now, I clearly did not think things through because I was like 14 and I just came home with a car. My parents were pissed and they told me to call one of my friends and have them pick the car up, and they also said that I couldn't work there anymore. To be honest though, I wasn't upset. The next day, I told Eli that I was quitting and asked if he could pick up my last pay. He tried to convince me not to quit, but I stuck to my parents being adamant on my quitting, and Eli would call me a few days later and tell me that Ryan wouldn't give me what he owed me. Instead, I had to get it myself. I never tried to get the money because I just couldn't face it. Fast forward a few months though, and I was with some of those guys, and my friend Joe said something. "Hey, guys, did Ryan ever ask you to show him your dick?" And to my surprise, everyone said yes, but they all said that they didn't do it. I lied to them all and made up some story where I freaked out and threatened him. And over the years, I found out that all of the kids did it. There were 8 of us. One kid did it with his mum waiting outside in a car to pick him up, in fact. Not sure if Ryan knew that she was outside, but the kid just never said anything. We all just kind of buried it. We were tough guys, or wanted to be, and no one wanted to remember that. Fast forward again 7 or 8 years this time, and I was 22 or 23, and a newer friend who was struggling to get work tells me that he landed a job at a junkyard in New Hampshire, except the guy who owns it asked him to get naked and show him his dick. And my mind nearly blew up. By then, I had grappled a bit with it and developed anger, and I freaked out. Asked him to tell me everything, and he said that he's known to pick people up for work, and after a couple of days of working, he invited my friend Joe into his trailer and basically did something that he did to me. What actually really disappointed me though was that my friend, who was in his 20s, actually did it. And even now, I understand the craziness of the request and how he's able to get you to do it, but I so badly wish that Joe acted the way that I wish I did, knocking this guy's teeth down his throat. What's even crazier though is that while he was telling me, this girlfriend that we both had overheard and says, "Are you guys talking about creepy Ryan?" And again, my mind just blows up. She tells us that he's apparently gotten multiple people over the years and he can't be touched, that people have tried, but he does tow work for the city and PD of that town and has since made connections. Now, I don't know the details of these reports, whether or not investigations were underway, but people told the truth and he was still out there doing what he wanted. And while hearing that he was still out there was truly shocking, My thoughts on him ended with that drunk conversation. Fast forward another 3 or 4 years, and I was 26 or so. I was out after a night of bar hopping, and a couple and I decided to get chicken at a late night spot everyone goes to after the bars close. And while I was there, I was approached by a guy who recognized me. I didn't recognize him at first, but then realized that it was an old friend, Brandon. We were friends at that time, and we both worked for him. Last I heard, he had a bad heroin addiction, and the rumors were certainly true because I could barely recognize him. He was happy to see me, though, and asked if I could spare a few bucks or a cigarette, then asked if I could give him a ride to where he was staying. Brandon said that he was abandoned and needed to get back up with his friend in NH, and I really didn't want to, but he was insistent and wouldn't stop asking despite my body language, and what I assumed was a distasteful look on my face as well, but in the end I agreed. I needed to get my car, so I took his number down and told him that I would call him when I was outside. He didn't believe me and kept begging that I don't ditch him, and honestly, looking back, I kinda wish that I did. So while we were driving, I was contemplating how Brandon was going to kill me, trying to drive alert just in case he tried anything crazy. I was aggravated because I didn't want to do this, and realizing more and more that we were never really friends, that I barely knew him years ago, that he was pretty much a stranger. I didn't like where this was going. But on the road, he tells me to take a left, and I get a really weird familiar sense of where we were, and I ask, "Hey, where is your friend's place?" Brandon replies, "Did you ever meet Ryan?" And honestly, every time I heard that guy's name, my mind just blew up. I literally shouted out, "Wait, what? You're staying with Ryan? That guy's a fucking piece of shit pedophile who takes advantage of kids. What the fuck are you doing there? I assumed that guy was in prison already." Brandon just laughed and said, "Yeah, I work with him. He's weird, but you just need to smack him up a bit and he doesn't try that weird shit on you." I was pissed and kept trying to explain to Brandon how severe this guy was and that it wasn't a small issue. But Brandon just kept shrugging it off and said many people have paid him visits and put him in hospital a few times even, and something about him being kidnapped at one stage and having to pay money to families threatening to kill him. He also said that the cops have paid him multiple visits and there was a charge against him at one stage, but he paid his fees and may be on some registry, but he still has everything that he had before. None of it was satisfying to hear, and I wanted to hear that he was rotting in prison, or even dead. After hearing this, though, I just refused to drive him all the way there, and I dropped him off at the top of the street. I said good luck, and I just sped off out of there. I was so angry driving home that he was still out there and even walking around. Eventually, though, I got home and I just kind of passed out and slept in late. When I woke up, though, I had a missed call and also a voicemail. I listened and it was Ryan. I'm assuming that Brandon told him that I gave him a ride and perhaps the things that I said. He said that I needed to call him back so that we could talk, that Brandon was in bad health and that he needed to talk to me. I was shocked and honestly a little bit scared. Hearing his voice seriously gave me chills, but I paced around my apartment and eventually decided to call him back. But when I called back, I just completely lost it. I screamed at him, called him a pedophile, and told him that I was actually going to kill him. I reminded him of what he did, all while swearing and describing how I wanted him dead. He eventually hung up on me, and I immediately blocked the number and started mentally preparing myself. I honestly thought that I had just started a war and told myself that I needed to get ready for him to come, that this guy would try to kill me because I wanted to expose him. Luckily, no one ever came though, and my paranoia eventually drifted off. I would move a couple of years later and can say that I've not heard anything of that name again. I also pray that I never do. Please though, the people who listen to this, if you have kids, watch out for them, hey? There are real psychos out there, and even though you think that you're well put together, things can happen to you or the ones that you know real quickly. I was ashamed for a long time for not coming forward and doing all that I could to stop this prick. It was easiest to just kind of bury it deep and act as if it never happened. That, unfortunately, comes with consequences, and it does change you. These days, I really don't trust anyone, and I make up the worst intentions for people right from the get-go. I'll never forgive him, that's for sure, and could care less if he died a painful death. I'll admit that I've grown from it and have moved on, but it still does sting a little knowing that he never faced the punishment that he deserved. I was reading a story that reminded me of an event from over 20 years ago. In the second half of 1998, I'd taken a job as a security guard at a plant that made locks. Being a kid, I usually worked one of three shifts, 4 p.m. to 12 a.m., 7:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m., 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. The 7:30 to 3:30 shift was for extra coverage, so there were always two of us there from 7:30 to midnight. It was a routine, boring job for the most part. We did our rounds, logged anything out of the ordinary, and watched a tiny monitor displaying the CCTV feed. And things went by in an almost painfully normal manner for 6 months. I worked, saved, bought a car, and planned to move. By late March of 99, I served my notice and prepared to head cross-country. A new hire was brought in to fill my spot, a soft-spoken man named Calvin. As part of his training, Calvin spent time working at all hours. At night, he was a shadow, working with myself and the other night guard, getting a feel for the plant's nocturnal routines. Most nights, he worked with myself and Amira, a female guard who was around my age. I was 18 at the time. Calvin, who was about a decade older than us, was quiet and polite, though something did seem to be missing. There's a spark that genuinely nice people seem to have, and he just didn't possess it. Whenever he went on rounds with me, he'd ask questions about the job and make small talk. I noticed that he was a little odd, laughing at odd times and changing his tone mid-sentence. At the time, I just kind of chalked it up to him being awkward. But that wouldn't last. So one night, near the end of his first week, he went on rounds with Amira. When they returned to the office, I knew something was wrong immediately. Normally talkative, she would barely say a word now. Not sure what had occurred, I waited until Calvin had gone to the restroom to ask. So, during their trip, everything had been normal until they reached the brass mill, a portion of the plant that shut down at 6 p.m. There were usually no employees there after that time and no lights. They were making their way to a checkpoint on a landing on top of a flight of stairs when the mood just shifted. She told me that she turned around, only to find that he was right on top of her. Startled, she backed against the grating at the end of the landing, and he leaned in towards her, his face nearly touching hers. He flirted in a low voice, and when she mentioned his wedding band, he said that it would all be over soon. From then on, I did the rounds, taking Calvin each time with me. The night ended without further incident, and I left a note for our supervisor detailing what had occurred. The next night came and went, though, with no Calvin. I did the rounds while Amira stayed in the locked office, and the same thing after that night, too. Then, on my second to last shift, I come in to find her freaking out because she found out why Calvin hadn't been at work. He had been arrested for murdering his wife. She had been dismembered and burned, parts of her body placed in a pond less than a mile from where we worked. That night and next, Amira called the jail to just make sure that they were still holding him. And based on the time frame, he had killed his wife months before he started the job. Close to 10 years ago, my best mate and I scored the deal of the century. Live in her parents' recently purchased and refurbished home for cheap as chips rent so that the property wasn't considered unoccupied and their insurance still covers it. They were planning on selling their house in the country and moving closer to town in a year, but when they spotted this place, it was perfect, so they snapped it up. They couldn't be bothered dealing with rando tenants for a year, so we were offered it, and we took it. It was a lovely old mid-Victorian style house with a hallway running the majority of the length on the left side, and 3 bedrooms and a bathroom coming off that hallway to the right. At the back of the house was an open-plan living room and kitchen, and a backyard. It was an inner Melbourneian suburb, so it was totally fenced in with 6-foot fence on 3 sides, and the front had a courtesy white picket fence. On the right side of the property, an outdoor gravel pathway was wedged beside the bedroom walls and the fence line. It began with a gate in the front yard and ran the length of the property to the backyard. This is important for later too. So, my mate obviously scored the master bedroom at the front, with lovely vertical opening bay windows facing in the front garden and the street. I had the next bedroom with a window facing the gravel path and the fence, and the 3rd bedroom was our study. We lived here for close to 10 months, I think, pretty much in total bliss. Great house, great company, and even though the area was considered a little bit dicey, the location was just stellar. Now, one hot summer's night, we said our good nights and I hit the hay and zonked out immediately. My housemate stayed up in bed to read for a bit, with just her bedside light on. She was doing that for just over an hour before she heard a weird kind of scratch on the front window of her bedroom. Initially, she put it down to an overhanging tree branch, till she realized that there was no overhanging tree branch there. She sat, kind of frozen in fear, blankly staring at her book for what felt like an eternity, till she heard the noise again, and again. Slowly looking up now, she saw a dude wearing a hoodie trying to open her window, looking her dead in the eyes. As she screamed, jumped out of bed, and ran right into my room. I woke up super dazed as she was pulling my hand and kind of whisper yelling, "You know the one," that someone was trying to break in. She had a tendency to be a little bit overdramatic sometimes, but I swear to you that I've never seen someone look so genuinely terrified. I went to grab my phone to call the cops, but we just went completely still and we heard the distinct crunching sound of someone walking down the side path of the house. We both rolled off my bed onto the floor and went completely still. The crunching continued, getting closer to my bedroom window now. I don't know what it is about distinct sounds at night when it's otherwise quiet, but it sounded deafening. And then I realized why it was so loud. Because my window was wide open. I jumped up, slid the window down and slammed the lock shut just as he reached that window. He looked at me, but he didn't react at all. He just calmly tried to open the window, but when he realized that he couldn't, he continued down the pathway to the backyard. I was thoroughly shitting myself now, and my housemate was sobbing in the floor looking up at me like a bunny about to be torn apart by a fox. I sprinted to the back door to thankfully find it locked, and ran back to my room and immediately called the cops. I don't know what the cops knew that we didn't, but they must have broken a land speed record to arrive all of 3 minutes later, both lights and sirens off. We saw them go down the side path, guns drawn, straight to the backyard. There were some noises from the yard, then a knock at the door a moment later, and the police identified themselves. Turns out, the dude had vaulted the back fence, an impressive feat, and another patrol car was headed to the next street over to look for him. The 2 cops at our place asked if we were okay, then asked if they could come in and take a look around. The cops were honestly amazing, but they managed to calm us down whilst making sure the place was safe, and I was just really impressed with how they handled the situation. I offered them a cup of tea, which they politely declined as they took our statements, and they asked if there was anyone that we could stay with tonight. My housemate and I stayed at her boyfriend's place for a few nights after that, and when we stayed in the house, it was just never the same after that. We felt completely violated, and ended up moving out a few weeks after that. We never found out if the dude was actually caught, but strangely enough, there was a random stabbing a few nights after the incident at the train station 2 streets over. If it was related or not, I don't know, but all I can think is that we were very lucky that it went the way that it did. Whenever I took the bus for school, I was pretty alone on the bus rides most of the time. I was always on one of those small buses. We did have other kids, but the highest amount of kids on the bus was probably around 5 or something, including me. I was the only one from my school on there, but all the other kids went to the same school. I should also mention too that I've had about 4 different bus drivers in my time, and the one that I'm about to talk about lost her husband about a year before and was out for a long time. Anyway, this takes place 4 or 5 years ago now. I was pretty young still. For morning rides, we dropped off the other kids and we were heading to my school, and we were the only ones on the road when the bus suddenly stops on the side of the road. I was really confused and I thought the bus had broken down. Being the shy kid that I was, I didn't say anything and I just kind of waited. My bus driver then randomly opened the door and I started to feel a bit uneasy for some reason. We weren't at my school yet, so why was she opening the door? And she was just staring out the door for like 2 minutes when I finally asked her, "Excuse me, are you okay?" "There's a man there," she said in such a low voice that it gave me chills. But when I looked, there was no man there or no person at all. She just kept staring for a couple of seconds when she finally closed the door and then just continued driving down the road. She wasn't my bus driver after that year, and quite honestly, I kind of miss her. She was a very sweet lady, but that moment, I don't know what it was about it, but it still freaks me out. I sometimes think that the man that she was talking about was maybe her husband. I don't know. I don't know why she stopped the bus like that and opened the door for a stranger, but it was weird. I attended a pretty awful university in the UK. In fact, it was so awful that Vice even published an article written by a student that attended at the same time as me, titled "The 3 Years of Hell at the University of Wolverhampton." I lived in a student building in the middle of the city. Of the 3 student buildings available, it was the middle choice. But literally, it was situated in the middle of the 3, and also figuratively, it was the middle, not as fancy as the fancy one, but not as unbearable as the worst one. Most of my friends lived in the fancy building, and to get there I had to walk a small trek through a residential part of the city, but somehow my friends found a shortcut. You could actually cut through and climb up at the back of the garden behind this abandoned house, I think, to get there in less than half the time. And so I started using this shortcut all the time. Now, one morning, I walked around towards the garden and down to my shortcut and found 3 grown men just standing there. They all looked, for lack of a better word, thuggish and quite large. I uttered a small "oh" when I saw them, and they looked up at me. A pale 19-year-old gay country boy with a blonde mohawk. I think that I apologized for barging in on what I was pretty sure was a drug deal, and I turned to walk back the way that I came and take the long way around. As I walked away, one of them shouted to get my attention. I ignored them, and then I heard them coming after me, so I started to run pretty quickly. I was much younger, slimmer, and fitter back in those days, so I managed to outrun them pretty easily and sprinted all the way around the long route to my friend's building, where they let me in. I explained what had happened, and no one was surprised. I mean, this was Wolverhampton after all. A few minutes later, a friend of ours arrived. He lived at a non-university student building off campus and had to walk a different way to get to where we were. When he arrived, he asked me, "Kyle, what did you do, man?" I asked him why, and he said that an enormous guy had come up to him and asked if he'd seen a guy with a blonde mohawk, but my friend acted dumb, even though he immediately knew who had been talking about. My poor choice of hairstyle was fairly distinct. The worst part, though, the guy was carrying a brick in his hand. It still gives me shivers all these years later, but it doesn't end there. So, me and my friends went out for a day out to Birmingham, bright lights, big city, whatever, and we didn't get home until late. When we got back to their building and drank until way after midnight, I started to relax and forgot my horrible ordeal from earlier that morning. At some point, more than a little drunk, I decided to head home. I was now pretty sure that I would never take the shortcut again, so I just took the long way home instead. As I was walking through the residential area, a car stopped on the opposite side of the road. And there were two guys inside, and the car was filled with smoke and just stank of weed when they rolled down the window to speak to me. I didn't have headphones in or anything, and I was the only person on the street, so I couldn't just ignore them or pretend that I couldn't hear them. The driver said, "Nice hair, bud," and his friends began to laugh. "Wait, mate, do you know where we can get some food?" I don't know, in the city centre," I said. I kept walking, trying not to show them how unnerved I was. They were facing the wrong way to drive alongside me, so the driver put the car in reverse so that they could keep pace with me. "Do you know any places?" A few. There's a kebab place at the top of the road, I think." "Get in, you can show us, yeah?" "Listen, man, I'm drunk and I'm tired and I've got lectures in the morning, dude," I said, trying to sound casual even though I was just about ready to piss my pants. It really hadn't been a good day. "We're going to turn around and come back and pick you up. Wait there, yeah?" the driver said. As the car started towards the end of the road, which was a dead end, to turn around, I heard the passenger say, "It's him. I know it's him." The car was far enough away, I broke into a sprint and ran back towards my building. I stumbled down the stairs and twisted my ankle pretty badly, but eventually managed to limp the rest of the way and got through the front door, just as the car drove past. I really dread to think what could have happened that day. And for the rest of my time at that god-awful university, I prayed to never meet any of those guys again. Fortunately, I never did. When I was a junior in high school, I was quite an odd kid. I liked having colourful hair, piercings, and all that kind of stuff. And the school that I went to was near Atlanta, so there weren't many people like me. I tried to find friends that liked the same kind of music and other interests that I had, and I could normally kind of push off any weird energy that people put off, just ignore it, because I just wanted some friends. Anyway, I was in gym one day hanging out with a group of weirdos, and there was a guy that I hadn't seen before. He was wearing a Guns N' Roses t-shirt and jeans that were like a size too small. His name was Ernest. We immediately clicked with each other in a kind of platonic way because we laughed at a lot of the same things. We started hanging out in the gym together every day, people watching and making fun of people playing basketball. And it wasn't too long until he started making fun of my appearance and making me feel absolutely terrible about myself. I actually had really bad acne, like super bad, in high school, and he joked saying that I had meth skin. First strike. Me being me, though, I kept hanging out with him, and eventually it led to hanging out after school as well. He would invite me over to his house, and we only stayed in his room. He refused to let me meet his family. His parents didn't really speak English, but I still wanted to meet them anyway. Plus, I always thought that it was a little bit weird that Ernest didn't know Spanish, but his siblings did. And when he would speak words, it sounded Russian. He pretty much only played It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia on TV and rambled about superheroes and would always come up with these strange scenarios where he was an evil villain and how much power he could have and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, fast forward a little bit and I get a job at a pizza place. Ernest gets the same job at this pizza place too. So, inevitably, we're always together. Like, always. He pretty much never let me out of his grasp, and it got to a point where he took me to school every day in his PT Cruiser, which I still get chills every time that I see one of those damn shoe-shaped ass cars. And it wasn't too long after this that we started skipping school a lot. I mean, we pretty much went to school about 2 or 3 times a week, maybe. This is where it starts to suck pretty bad too. So he started pressuring me to do sexual things with him. I don't really want to get into the details because it's pretty disturbing, but he manipulated the situation in such a way that I felt like we were in a relationship because I thought that I needed him. He really convinced me that we were a couple, but I was so repulsed by him that I never could fully accept that. He started telling our other friends that he had sex with me and that we were in a relationship too. I denied it all, and to this day I deny it. I've lied to therapists and I've lied to my friends, but right now I'm admitting to all of that. At one point though, he ended up living with me and my family in the same room as me. He had convinced my entire family that he was gay so he could live with me. He literally dressed up in pink and put a scarf around his neck and pranced around my aunt trying to win her over with his fake personality. I was so used to living in chaos that this was barely a problem for me. During all of this, he was such a rude piece of shit to me though. For instance, I remember asking him for a ride one day. I can't remember to where, but he said no, for no good reason. I started getting really pissed off because he couldn't actually give me a reason, and he just kept smirking at me. He did this type of thing frequently too. We were sitting in the living room one day, and he silently got up and just drove off somewhere, came back, walked to the living room doorway, stared at me for 15 seconds, and then walked into my room. I hear a bunch of rustling, so I storm in there thinking that he's up to something sketchy, and he's gotten completely dressed into his sleep pants with his hands in his pocket, and he just wouldn't take his hand out of his pocket. At this point, I'm kind of scared, so I force my hand into his pocket, and I pull out a knife, and I don't remember how the night or the days continued after that, but that was the first thing that really creeped me out. Fast forward again though, and I'm at my best friend Kayla's birthday party and everyone's camping in the backyard. Ernest hated Kayla because she was way out for me, in his perspective anyway. But she got in the way of us apparently, and I'm sweating typing this out because this is probably one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. The sequence of events is a little bit blurry, but I do remember most of it. So I had made it clear to Ernest at this point in time that we were not a thing and that he needed to let go of this fantasy. I had a crush on this boy named John, and we slept in the same tent together. Morning comes, and I hear Ernest outside asking people if they knew where I was. Someone said, "She's in the tent with John." I was scared immediately, and I knew something bad was about to happen. He begins screaming as loud as he can, cussing all of us out, and just pitching an absolute fit, and then he just storms off. He goes to his car and calls me and tells me to get in the car, now. Everyone there was freaked out, and Kayla advised me not to go into the car because she knew how scary Ernest was just as a person. I didn't want anyone to be uncomfortable, so I figured that if I went to the car it would ease everyone just a little bit, that he wasn't there. So I went. And as soon as the car door closed, we sped off, fast, and I mean really fast. I looked over at him wide-eyed, and he screamed crying with absolutely no expression in his face, tears streaming but completely emotionless. It was really weird. He says to me, "You were supposed to love me," over and over again, and he starts speeding faster and faster and said, "If I can't love you, then no one else can." I'm actively having a straight panic attack in this passenger seat. I can't hear because my ears are ringing and I can't see anything. Meanwhile, Kayla has already called my mum, and somehow my mum left the house fast enough to track us down in the PT Cruiser, and he parks at a church and my mum is watching us, and Ernest has a box cutter at his side. I get a call from my mum, and I can't really remember what she said, but I know it was something along the lines of, "I'm going to kill you, Ernest." He started coming to his senses after that, if you can even call it that, and drops me back off at Kayla's and tells me that he's going to end himself after he drops me off. Kayla and I are frantically trying to call his parents, but they can't speak English. In the end, though, he called the police on himself because he thought that he was going to harm himself or somebody else. He was gone for a couple of weeks after that, and when he came back, he was parked outside my school just waiting for me to come out. He runs up to me, and I noticed that he had on a plaid button-up shirt and it was tucked into his pants, which was just extremely odd to me. And I knew immediately, too, that this was a completely fake personality. He was speaking differently as well, proper almost, like a few weeks had turned him into a saint. It wasn't long after that I had admitted myself into a mental institution because I just kept breaking down. Everyone in the group told me to get rid of him, and I'd not realized just how serious this all was until I saw everyone's reactions to the stories. There are so many other stories too of this psycho, but I really don't have the time to type all of them out. I will say that I did get rid of him, and I found new friends, and without them, I really don't know how I would have gone. I haven't seen or spoken to him in about 3 years, and I'm hoping to keep it that way. Once when I was about 12 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night needing to take a leak. I walked across the hall to the little bathroom, hit the lights, and was about to reach for the toilet when I glanced up and saw a face in the mirror, and it wasn't mine. It was as if someone was on the other side, standing to the right, with their face right next to the glass, staring at me. I only saw it for the briefest moment, but it's forever seared into my mind. I screamed and ran out of there to find my dad, and of course, my dad investigated and calmed me down, or tried to. Eventually, we had a prayer session because I was so freaked out, and I must have gone back to sleep at some stage. Fast forward to my 30s, I'd forgotten all about the event. One night while visiting, my dad quietly brings it up, and he says, "Hey, do you remember that one time that you saw the face in the mirror?" It suddenly came back to me in a rush of memory, sending a chill down my spine. "Yeah, I remember that." "Well," he said, "I sometimes think about that night." He looked down at the floor with a serious expression. "Because I saw it too." He went on to describe exactly what I'd seen, and we still have no idea what it was. Apparently when he investigated, he saw it and had a freak out of his own. Apparently the prayer session was as much for his own nerves as mine. And I respect him for keeping that tidbit from me till my 30s, but I kinda wish that he never had told me. This happened within the last 24 hours. So I live in a large city in the US, and like many people, I've taken it on myself to try and get back in shape during the new year, so I've recently got into running and lifting 5 days a week. Yesterday was a run day for me, and I usually start at my apartment and cross over to this long park that runs the river close to my apartment. The park is filled with sports fields, tennis courts, and many runners along the pathway too. I've been going 2 or 3 times a week for just over a month now. So, I was on my run last night listening to a podcast, minding my own business, and decided to go a little further than I normally do. To this kind of longer stretch where the park sort of ends for like a half mile before it picks back up again. Kind of an area where they park equipment. Many people avoid this area due to it kind of being not waterfront and kind of ugly, but I decided to run to the end of this area before circling back home. As I'm running, I see a man, 200 or feet so ahead of me, kind of walking in my direction. Not unusual at all. I've passed like 40 people already. But this area is empty except him and I, as most people circle back. Still though, I ride my bike here to commute for work and have never gotten weird vibes. I'm also an average built man and feel pretty secure most places in my relatively safe neighborhood. So I keep running, listening to my podcast, when I notice the man's path is directly in line with me, as in, if I continue 150 more feet, I would dead set run into him. So I shift to the other side of the path, 10 or so feet, keep running, not paying attention, looking back up now, and he's in my path again. Still no alarms because, well, maybe he shifted to get out of my way too, and we did that thing where you kind of walk into each other almost. So I shift back to the side that I started on, and this time I watch him and he shifts to my side. I'm thinking this guy must be messing with me. I'm 50 feet away now, and between there and 20 feet, I keep shifting more and more quickly, and he follows me exactly to the point that he's sidestepping instead of moving forward, waiting for me to reach him. At this point, I take his presence in. He's 6'3" at the shortest, in jeans and black hoodie with a hood up. Can't really make out his face due to a streetlight behind him casting a shadow, but I begin to realize, oh shit. I come to a stop and go to pull my headphones out and begin the sentence, "What the hell's up, man?" I get to the "what the hell" part when he raises both arms above his head and begins to scream at me. No legible words that I can hear over my podcast at least, and I do notice that he has something long and white or beige in his hands. And at this point, I begin to backtrack, keeping eyes on him. All of a sudden, he dashes towards me, running with his arms stretched out to grab me. I turn and hightail it the other way. It should be known too that I'm not in the best shape at this point. I've had numerous injuries requiring surgeries, and I've just done about 75% of my intended run for the night. But I can tell you that I've never run faster. He kept pace though and closed much of the distance, but when we started going slight uphill, I continued to make ground. We came to a fork in the path after about a minute of this. The two paths circled around a fenced-in area that contained a construction vehicle or mowers, etc., and I made it look like I was going one way and, at the very last moment, dashed the other way. The paths kind of made a circle, so I was able to get far enough ahead to where he couldn't see me via the fence and bushes, and when I felt like it was my chance, I dove into a bush, clawed my way under the fence, and crawled through the space and out the other side of the fence. He kept looking for me in the bushes, prowling back and forth, and finally saw me on the other side of the enclosure, and at this point, I was already on the phone with the police trying to get help as gulped down breaths of air were continuing. I was also warning other runners, and he eventually just followed my pace opposite side of the fence. He kept ducking into darker areas around the enclosure, and eventually I just lost sight of him. I began getting worried again and kept wandering around, warning people while I was waiting on the cops. After about 15 minutes of not seeing him, I just pieced the hell out of there as the cops said that they were close. The jog home was horrible, and any time a runner passed me, I would have a mini panic attack. I was kind of in shock, I think, and running off adrenaline the remainder of the night. I'm not really sure what happened or what was going on. It felt like it was something from a movie. Today I checked the Citizen app and Twitter to see if anything had happened, and I'm not sure if it's related. It most likely isn't, but 5 hours after I called the cops, they pulled the body of a man out of the river a mile or two downriver from where the attempted attack initially occurred. This is something that I share with new people that I meet sometimes, but obviously no one believes me. My family moved to a new house in 2011. I was 17 or 18 years old at the time. It's one of the first houses built in town, and it's very old. We found newspapers, in fact, dating back to events of Russian Revolution. And yes, I live in Russia. I must say that the house itself has different extensions built much later, and basically, the oldest wooden part of the house is right in the middle. In the part of the house that we own, or rather I should say apartment, we've only one wooden room on the first floor. When we moved in, I decided to choose that oldest said room, and I remember feeling like I just wasn't welcome there from the very first day. Quite honestly too, I really didn't put much thought into it at first, but it very quickly got very spooky. So, I remember seeing objects move on their own, a rope crawling on its own underneath my bed while I sat on it, footsteps at night, weird buzzing sounds that I once recorded on a camera, and once I witnessed a sheet of paper stealthily crawl from the top surface of the desk to drawers as I was sitting in it. It was evening and the desk lamp was on, but it didn't spook me too much, but It kind of made me indignant, like, what the hell? Is this for real? I grabbed that sheet of paper from whatever force was holding it, and I just kind of chuckled in disbelief. But each day it just got a little more terrifying. And the two worst events that I remember go as follows. So it's midnight and I'm in bed, just trying to fall asleep, and something's bothering me, and I feel eyes on me, but my own eyes are closed. I decided to open them, and I shit you not that there's a floating face of a man right above my bed. Thick eyebrows, angry expression, just a head staring at me and no body. We locked eyes for a minute in silence, and I was too afraid to move. Eventually, though, I forced myself to rush out of the room, and that night, I slept with my mum like I was 5 years old again. And the second one, I was actually having a dream, and I can't recall all the details, but all I remember is it was about a kid. A kid around 8 years old, I think. Skinny, light blue top, and dark blue shorts. I remember drawing it at the time too, because the dream just felt really surreal, and anyway, I suddenly woke up, and I thought to myself, it must be around 3 a.m, and I decided to check my phone to see if I was right, and the moment that I flinched, I heard loud and clear someone running away from my bed towards the hall. Luckily, eventually I moved to the second floor, but it was probably the scariest year of my life. It seems like whatever it was, it kind of deliberately avoids newer parts of the house and for some reason sticks with the old. I don't know. But nobody lives in that room anymore, and it's just a bit of a guest room now, so I guess that whatever's in there might be happy now. About 3 years ago, I went camping with my girlfriend, now ex, as she had always expressed interest but never had been. The spot that we went to is in the Huron National Forest and is my go-to trail or camp spot, as it's hidden deep in the forest and the access to the trails is close and easy for ATVs. My family has not been going to this spot for about 6 years now, and my friends had introduced me about 10 or so years. But we went for a weekend trip, and I'm glad that we didn't go any longer. When we got there, everything was going well, except we did notice a group of people that were hanging out next to our campsite, but they were just kind of stargazing and ended up leaving at some point. Then around midnight is when the weird stuff started to occur. At first, it sounded like someone was laughing at us, but the laugh never ended and got very high-pitched and sounded as it just kind of kept going. After a while, we both kind of got a little bit scared and went into the tent to try and sleep, and that was when the laugh or the noise moved up higher, and then started to circle the campsite. After a while of that happening, it just all of a sudden stopped and then started again at around 3 a.m. When it started again, the fire was going out, so I went and stoked the fire with my shotgun in hand and turned on the flashlight to see if maybe I could see any coyotes or something around the campsite, but when I did, I didn't see anything or hear any movements below. This all went on until 6 a.m. and then stopped, and that was finally when we were able to get some rest. After we woke up, we checked around the campsite and didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so we just kind of packed up. Once we were packed up and good to go, I go to start my vehicle and it's just completely dead. That really freaked me out, as I'm always paranoid about leaving things plugged in that kill the battery, and I made sure everything was closed properly and unplugged, yet somehow the battery just still died. I was able to get a jump from a AAA, and the phone call was hard to explain, and the lady who took the call didn't believe me, but at the end we both just laughed at it. But after that happened, I told my friend who had shown me the campsite and also has a cabin in the same forest, roughly 25 miles away from that campsite, about what happened, and he got freaked out. He told me about 2 incidences which he has had, one at the campsite and one at this cabin. At the campsite, he stated that one night after we had all returned from trail riding and went to bed, he stayed up to hang out by the fire and have a few drinks. While he was hanging out, he was just looking off into the distance, and when he did, he saw a pair of eyes up in the trees looking directly at him. He described them as kind of bioluminescent eyes, and he flashed his high-powered flashlight at them, but when he did, there was nothing there. And as soon as the flashlight turned off, they were there again, looking right back at him. So he just packed up and went right to bed that night. He didn't tell us because he didn't want to scare us, plus he wasn't sure if we would believe him. At the cabin, though, he was hanging out with his brother, and they were both just chilling by the fire outside when they both saw a pair of eyes looking at them from a trail that leads into the woods. They stated that at the height the eyes were looking at them, whatever it was, had to have been at least 7 feet tall, if not taller. They started shooting at it with their rifles, 2 30-30s, and the eyes disappeared, but once they were done, they reappeared and were closer this time. At that point, they both freaked out and went back into the cabin, and they didn't leave until daylight. We have no idea what this could have been, but all of us have felt very scared when these events were happening. After we all talked about it, one of the brothers thinks that it's a Wendigo. I really don't know what to believe about that, and I don't know what it could be, but I haven't felt that scared since that night. This is something that I didn't realize the severity of until I was much older. So, my mum had left me and my brother home alone one day. It was midday. My brother was 12, maybe 13 or so, I think. So, I must have been around 9 years old. I was watching him play Xbox in our living room. He had his headset on, talking to his friends, when there was a knock from the door in our carport. I run and answer the door without looking, and it's a grown man that I've never seen before. We're separated by the screen door, which at the time was actually unlocked. He asks, "Hey kid, are your parents home?" And horror just immediately washes over me. First of all, he's knocking from the carport, which is strange in and of itself. A stranger would knock on our front door, right? Plus, our carport is empty. We only had one car and my mother had taken it. I have a feeling that this man knows that my parents aren't home. I'm afraid. I really don't know why, but I was immediately scared. My brother in the other room comes to mind, and while I've never had a father figure, my brother has always been the one who has made me feel safe. He was the strongest person in the world to me, someone who could protect me in any situation. How most people would regard their father, I think. Anyway, I feel as though I can barely speak, and I'm wide-eyed, and I manage to stutter out eventually. No, but my big brother's here. Without even a moment's pause, this man reaches for the screen door and starts to open it. And, like an act of God or divine intervention of some sort, an arm reaches out from behind me over my shoulder and grabs the door. My brother pushes past me, holding the door, forcing the man back with his presence. The man tells my brother that he was looking to buy some crappy old swing set that was in our front yard at the time, and eventually my brother closes the door and just goes back to his headset and continues playing. I sit down as well, and I just continue watching him, and I don't believe we ever told our mum for some reason. Luckily, I never encountered this person again, and it pretty much fades from my memory. But as I got older, it did become one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. Creepy, and not so much because of what happened, but what could have. It was just really unnerving how absolutely oblivious we were to the whole situation. I like to think that the man was planning to lock me in a room, rob the place and leave, but boy, people can be really evil sometimes. So, who knows? This happened to me a couple of years ago when my now husband and I were living in a townhouse in a pretty decent area. My husband was working third shift as a corrections officer at our local corrections facility, and I was working as a waitress or a bartender. It was an unusually warm night for mid-March, so I took advantage and decided to take my husband's 80-pound Alaskan Malamute Siberian Husky mix on a quick walk around the neighborhood near our complex. We get to the end of the street that leads into the complex that we live in, and across the street is a Marathon gas station. I notice as the dog, Luke, stops to relieve himself, and there's a guy across the street at the gas station with a case of beer in his hands. I have my phone out, texting a friend, and looked back up to notice the guy was near the stop sign, also relieving himself on the sign. I felt really awkward and instantly put my phone away, and I led Luke down the street on our path. At this point, I think this guy noticed us too, and he crossed the street to where Luke and I had just been. I hear him walking a few feet behind me and just keep my head down, staring at my phone with Luke glued to my hip. After about 10 seconds, I hear this guy's steps getting closer. Luke realizes too that there's someone behind us, and he stops in his tracks. Mind you, he is a big dog compared to my 5'2" self, but I can handle him pretty easily, and he's very well trained by my husband. But I noticed his ears were perked up and his tail was straight up. I was glad that he was aware of the surroundings, but I still wanted to keep moving and away from this guy. I don't know, I just got a weird feeling. This guy finally catches up though, so I tighten my grip on Luke's leash and pull him closer to me and step into the grass to allow this guy to pass us and keep Luke out of his way. But does this guy keep going and pass us? No. When I thought that he was about to pass us, I started out a small apology because Luke was pulling on his leash, a little to investigate this guy, and most people did get intimidated by him just by his size. Like I said, he's a pretty big dog in my opinion. But the guy stops and just kind of stares at me for a minute, long enough for me to smell the cigarettes and the booze rolling off of him and to notice that he's probably in his mid to late 20s, dark hair, scruffy looking, and just kind of really dirty. He smiles though, and then finally seems to notice Luke trying to get to him and asks, "Cute dog, what's his name?" Instead of making up a name, I just said Luke. He then proceeds to ask me if he can pet my dog, and before I can even give him an answer, he leans down to start petting Luke's head, and Luke did not like that one bit. Luke jumped at him as a warning, and the guy backed up, kind of chuckling. I apologized and mentioned that he was very protective, and made up a lie that he was trained as my dad's former canine unit. My dad is a software developer, by the way. But instantly, I saw this guy's face change. I don't know what to call it, but he looked a little bit put off by that. He asked me what my name was, and I gave him a fake one. He then asked if I lived around here, and I said that I was visiting a friend of mine for the weekend. He then made a sudden step towards me, and I'm not lying when I say that I have never heard my husband's dog growl in the 5 years that I've been with him, but the sound that came from my dog sounded like something straight out of a horror film. Luke's hair was spiking on his spine now, and he was throwing himself up on his back legs and kicking his front legs at this guy. He had put himself completely between myself and the guy and was now snapping at him. This freaked the dude out so much that he stumbled backward, nearly dropping his beer. He quickly said, "Well, have a nice night, cutie," and then just stumbled off down the road. When I say my heart was pounding, it was deafening, and I grabbed Luke's leash so hard and sprinted between the buildings until I got back to my townhouse and locked all the doors and collapsed by the front door. Luke was in my face the whole time, kissing me and whining. This dog is the sweetest and most gentle creature that I've ever met, and hearing him growl and seeing him react the way that he did made me realize that I needed to get out of that situation, and fast. Back in the 80s, my parents bought a camping trailer, and every summer, my family, mum, dad, and 2 brothers, we would all go camping. Often a few of my cousins and aunt would also tag along. Sometimes it would be a weekend trip, and other times we would stay for a week at a time. Most camping trips were up in NH. It was so much fun, and for most of my childhood, nothing really crazy happened at all. But one morning, I woke up and noticed that my cousin or best friend was sleeping in the same bunk as me. I didn't think much about it, but as I pushed her to let her know that I was getting up, she said, "Are you really awake this time?" I said, "Yeah, to her strange question and went to the front of the camper to get a drink. My mum and aunt were sitting outside the camper having coffee, and when I went out to say good morning, they said, "Come talk to us." I walked outside and could tell that my mum looked upset, like she'd been crying. My aunt was a bit shaky as she asked, "Do you remember what happened last night?" I shook my head no and listened as my aunt told me about the extremely strange night, which I do not recall whatsoever. My aunt explained that at about 2 a.m. she woke up to the door to the camper being wide open. She quickly checked the bunks and noticed that I was nowhere to be found. She woke up my mum and dad, and then my mum and dad got flashlights and started frantically searching for me outside around the immediate area. My aunt stayed behind because there were still 4 kids sleeping in the camper, and after a scary 10-minute search, my dad finally spotted me. I walked out of the camper and into the trees about 30 feet away. It was far enough that I could not be seen unless he walked into the trees a bit, and I was just standing out there in the dark, with my eyes completely open but not responding to him at all. I had no shoes, no flashlight, and was wearing just shorts and a t-shirt. He said that he grabbed my hand and started walking me back to the camp, and he remembers asking me, "Hey, what's going on? Why in the world would you come out here on your own like that?" Then I finally spoke up and said, "I need to wait here, Dad. Let's just stay here." My mum remembers that I then started crying as she and my dad let me go back to the camper. Whenever I think back to this story, I get a strange feeling too. Thank God that my aunt woke up when she did. It's important to note too that I've never been known to sleepwalk before or after that night since then. It truly was an isolated incident which could have had a very different ending had I not been so lucky. My mum was so upset too that she decided to get rid of that trailer, and we didn't do much camping after that night. So I used to be naively helpful to all sorts of strangers, and even often picked up hitchhikers, solo and in groups, and get them where they needed to go. When I was 19, I moved to Huntington, a college town in West Virginia, and I worked at a popular bar at the time. My shifts would start around 9 p.m. and ended about 2 a.m. I didn't really know anybody in this town, or state even, and I'd been there on my own for only a month or so at this stage. So on one of these nights, one of the customers had taken an interest in conversing with me while I was working my shift. Me, being a good employee, conversed pleasantly back. He was in his 30s or 40s, buzzed white hair with a group of other guys, all of them tattooed with leather jackets. Nothing against leather or tattoos, I have and wear both in fact, just giving a visual detail. Now, he'd been there going back and forth between them at their table and me at the bar, pretty much talking to me non-stop for a good couple of hours. Around 1:30 a.m. he mentions that he doesn't know where his friends went. I look up, oblivious, and see the whole bar had virtually cleared out. He was right though, not one of his buddies was in sight. He says that they must have all gotten drunk and just forgot about him, leaving him there. The man is clearly bummed and quite concerned because, as he tells me, he lives almost an hour away from here and has no way of getting home now, and it's the middle of winter, so it's snowing pretty hard. He spends the next few minutes on the phone calling different friends that were at the bar with him, but no one is answering. He's pretty clearly screwed, and I can't leave him in the bar. I can't in good conscience leave the man out in the snow either. So, fuck. Now I've got to drive this stranger home in a place that I'm unfamiliar with, in conditions that I've never really driven in before, no snow in my home state. I tell him don't worry though, and when I finish clearing the bar and closing up, I'll take him home. And I do. We get in the car and he gives me directions as we go. We're talking casually like we had been for quite some time, just some superficial conversation, nothing even hinting at sexual or flirty. I'm not a flirty person at the best of times, so I'm positive that there was no misunderstanding here either. Keep in mind too, it's like 2 a.m, no one knows where I am, or that I'm with this rando, and it's snowing heavily now. And as we're chatting, I suddenly feel this hand on the back of my neck. It was such an unpleasant feeling. It was truly such an unpleasant feeling. I remember his fingers swirling in the little hairs at the bottom of my hairline, which were too short to make into sort of a ponytail. Ugh. I scrunched my neck though and just calmly said, "I have a knife," as I kept looking forward, driving. The swirling ceased, but the hand lingered on my skin. Again, calmly but more firmly, I said, "I have a knife." He removed his hand and we kept driving. I figured whatever that was is handled and we get back to our conversation. Minutes later, though, I feel his hand fully against the back of my neck again, his fingers wrapped gently around its curve. I scrunched my neck again and said, "Seriously, I have a knife." He removed his hand once more and then, in a very hurt tone, he said, "Are you really scared of me?" After that, he kept his hands to himself, and it was a long 1-hour drive. But I did get him home, and after that I took off. I'm 29 now, and it wasn't until many years later did it occur to me the whole thing was probably a setup that he and his friends had planned. They probably left him stranded so that the chick that he's been talking to all night will have to take him home, opening the door for sex, consensual, or maybe not. I guess the moral of the story here is don't let people you don't know into your car. Oh, and also, always carry a knife. This happened at a large shopping centre in Adelaide, South Australia, a couple of months ago. But for some context too, it was around 7 PM on a late trading night, already completely dark outside. So, I was shopping with my partner and she went into a clothing store, both to make some returns and also try on some replacement clothes. I knew that it was going to take a little bit of time and I'm not overly interested in women's clothing, so I stood outside in the very busy centre and was responding to some work emails on my phone, paying very little attention to all of the people walking past. After about 5 minutes, I was approached by a fairly young-looking gentleman, early to mid-20s at most, I'm 23 myself, with a very strong European accent, possibly French, who said to me something along the lines of, "You were with a girl, yes? She was looking for you. She came up to me, I think, because we are wearing similar shirts and thought you were me." Thinking back at it, other than buttons on our shirts, they were not really similar at all. But he told me that he was trying to find me and made it seem like something was wrong, and insisted that he could show me where she went. I looked into the store and couldn't see my partner. It was a fairly small clothing store inside the centre. You could see all of it from outside, in fact. I found out later, too, that she was just in a changing room. But I was extremely confused at the time. My partner knows that I would just be aimlessly pacing in circles outside as I do when I'm reading emails and would never walk off looking for me, not to mention that she could have just texted or called. Although confused, he was moving away fast enough that I didn't have time to ask many questions, and not being able to see my partner convinced me to at least follow where he was going. There had to have been hundreds of people around, so I wasn't very worried for my own well-being. And as I followed the gentleman, I was leaving a good 2 or so meters between us, walking behind. I don't remember feeling overly unsafe or concerned about being near him, just extremely confused and kind of unsure, I suppose. He could see that and kept repeating something along the lines of, "This isn't a joke. Please believe me. I want to help. Come with me. She went this way. I saw where she went." We'd only been walking for about 10 seconds at this point, but covering a fair bit of distance from the store that I was originally at. I said something like, "Where was she going? What did she say to you?" And he told me, "Sorry, my English isn't very good. She's this way." We kept walking like this for another 10 seconds before we reached the doors to the building. We were on a side of the centre that has doors leading to both a car park and a large loading dock for one of the supermarkets. Although busy in the centre, there was almost no one around the doors going in or out. And he walked straight outside and said something along the lines of, "She was sitting just on this bench. I don't know where she went." Other than a small bit of light under the cover where a bench is, it was completely dark as soon as you walked any further away. I walked up to the point where the automatic doors opened, but no further, and looked, 1 foot outside, 1 foot inside. And he said something like, "She must have walked this way. Come, I'll help you find her." And started to walk left, which only leads to a dark and secluded loading dock, not visible from the doors. You could tell the urgency that he was trying to convey to follow him now, though, and I was already very confused and unsure up until that point. But as soon as it happened, I knew that whatever he wanted me to follow him down there for wasn't going to be good. It was one of those moments where you piece it all together finally and realized how many warning signs you somewhat noticed but ignored, and I instantly felt like I was in danger. I remember saying, all good, thank you, I'll call her, and just turning straight around and walking back inside. I turned around after a few seconds and couldn't see him outside anymore. Although it felt like a long time, all of this must have transpired in about, maybe 45 seconds from when he first started talking to me. And it was at this point that I texted my partner, who let me know that she was still at the same store that I last saw her at. At the time, I said to her that I think I may have almost been abducted. A bit over the top, I know, especially for a fairly large 20-year-old bloke like I am. I'm assuming, though, that if I'd gone down there, I was probably going to get robbed. I'm glad, though, that I'll hopefully never know. I went straight to center security, though, and I did report it. They took some details of where and when it happened, but didn't seem overly concerned. But anyway, be careful out there, guys, because you just never know who may cross your path one day. This story took place in Texas back in the fall of 1994. I was traveling from a small town outside of Dallas called Grapevine and was heading to my duty station. And I would never take this route again after what happened this night along the I-20. So I was traveling alone and had left at around 7 p.m. on my road trip across Texas. If you've ever been to Texas, then you know that you can drive for hours on end and still be in Texas. And this story would change my life forever. So I decided to stop at a rest stop along the highway to stretch my legs and take a piss. I noticed a woman in a late 70s model Ford parked in the lot when I got out. I went and did my business, had a smoke, and before I left I noticed the woman still sitting in her car. So I walked over and knocked on the window, which did startle her, and asked if she was okay or needed help. She smiled and said that her tire was flat and that her battery had died while she was waiting here. I asked if she had a spare tire and she said no. I asked if anyone was coming to get her and she said that her daughter was supposed to, but it's been several hours of just her waiting there. I asked where she was going and she told me the location, so I offered to give her a ride if she wanted. She actually started crying and said that this would be wonderful. So we started heading to the location and were making small talk. I told her that I was in the Air Force and heading to Lubbock. She said that that was wonderful and hoped that I really enjoyed it. I did notice, though, that she kept looking in the mirror, so I asked if she was okay with me giving her a ride. She smiled and said that everything was fine. She was just happy that somebody had stopped. We finally get to her house in a small suburb just outside of town. She thanks me for a ride and hands me a scrap of paper with a home number on it. And she asks that I call her when I get to my destination so she can know that I made it safely. I thanked her and said that I would, but I'd wait until the morning since I knew that it was going to be late when I arrived. I arrived at Reese AFB late that night and stayed at the on-base hotel. I got checked in and took a shower, and eventually I just went to bed. The next morning I got up and I got dressed for the day and went to find my unit HQ. I didn't even think about the night before because I had so much to do, checking squared away and whatnot, and it wouldn't be for another 2 weeks before I came across that scrap of paper with the number. I kind of felt bad that I hadn't kept my promise to call, so I decided to stop what I was doing and just give her a call. I called the number and a young woman answered the phone, so I asked for Sandy. The woman on the line said, "Who?" So I apologized and said maybe it was Sandra. She asked who this was, and I gave her my name and explained that I had given her a ride a couple of weeks back. She said that I must be confused, and I read the number off of the paper in my hand just in case I dialed the wrong number. She said no, I had the correct number, but I couldn't give her mother a ride home because she had passed away in the early 80s. She was apparently driving home and began having car troubles, so she stopped at a rest stop just outside of town. When she didn't make it home, her father became concerned, and it was at that time that there was a knock on their door, and 2 state troopers and local police officers were at the door. She said that a trooper saw the vehicle stopped at the rest stop and stopped to check it out. What he found and what she told me gave me chills. Her mother had been brutally sexually assaulted, and her head was completely bashed in. Someone had slid her tires and disconnected her battery, and the worst part was that she didn't die right away, as there was bloody handprints on the window, steering wheel, and shifter, because she was trying to leave. The trooper said that they didn't have any suspects, but there were times that certain motorcycle clubs would pass through at night. I described the car and what her mother looked like and what she was wearing as best as I could recall. She definitely didn't look old enough to have a daughter my age, but her daughter just started crying and asked that I not call back. A few days later, though, I received word to report to the squadron commander, so I headed over to our building. When I arrived, my captain called me into his office and began asking me questions about where I lived and when did I drive in and what route I took. I immediately knew that something was wrong, and we then went into a briefing room where my CO and Texas Ranger and a state trooper were seated. I introduced myself and I took a seat. They began by asking the same questions my captain had previously asked and why I had called the number and spoke with the woman. I explained everything as clearly and in detail as possible. They then finished taking notes, and the ranger asked who needed a smoke. So my CO excused himself, and the captain, the 2 officers, and myself stepped out back to the smoking area. And this was when the ranger informed me that he was the actual trooper who had found the car back in the early 80s, and that the only reason he came out today was because of the details that I mentioned in my phone call to the daughter. The trooper said that they do get calls about a stranded woman every so often, but when they get there, they never find anything. So, in closing, I guess you need to be careful who you decide to help because not everyone is what they seem. I'd like to state too that the reason specific time frames are not given is due to the personal nature of some of these events. But I can assure you that everything I've told you is true. So, this happened years and years ago, and I was young, but I've asked my grandma about this incident recently. My grandma is a big road rager and likes to cuss and flip off and pull around people all the time. It's gotten better in her later years, but this was in 2014, I think. My grandma didn't tell my grandpa and I this story until it actually happened. So, before we get into that though, here's some background about how I knew the mum and the kids. The mum was really sweet, and I was in her son's class in elementary, and I walked past her all the time on the way to the buses while she was waiting for my classmate. I also had daycare with all 3 of the kids, and I can't say that I met her boyfriend or ever saw him since I was young and I was in my own world playing with friends, but once in a while, just walking past her, she asked if I knew where my classmate was since he was running late, and I stood next to her and played with the youngest while she waited until I almost missed the bus. Anyway, back to the incident. So, my grandma is a big road rager, and on her way back from work mostly because of rush hour, she was going around a roundabout, about the only one in our town and pretty new, and a car behind her kept honking and riding on her bumper. She finally got sick of it because she was focused on trying to get around this new roundabout while having someone on her bumper, and honked her horn for a few seconds while at a stop and flipped the car off. She watches this guy in the mirror as he gets out of the car and cracks his knuckles while speed walking up to her. He's cussing her out, and she recognized the look on his face from past incidences with not too nice men. She was on her own though, and her car required her to manually lock the doors and trunk and roll up her window. She basically said, "Screw this," and sped around the stopped cars in front of her, which was really dangerous because of just how narrow it was, and just got off the roundabout. A month later though, they're watching the news while I'm in my room, and my grandparents start talking. It was a small house and I could hear them at least muttering. My grandpa yells for me, so I get up and I go back to the room. "Hey, don't you know little Johnny from school?" my grandpa asked, and I nodded, feeling confused and wondering if something happened to him. My grandpa plays the news story and he says, "Do you know his mum?" And the news told the whole story of how the man strangled her to death and posted the pictures on 4chan and the caption that, "If you don't believe me, watch the Washington News Channel at about so-and-so hours. Her son will be home then." It was the oldest son that discovered her nude and dead, and I had a few interactions with him before because of daycare and whatnot. And honestly, my entire heart just hurts thinking about it. My grandma sat up when they showed the boyfriend's face, and she realized it. That was the man in the car behind her. And I mean, he even looked recognizable to me as well. Probably because it's just a small town, and I may have seen him at some stage. But she told us the whole story, and even just thinking about it sent shivers up my spine. He could have been slowly breaking just then, and that's why he raged out like he did. I'm just really happy that my grandma got out of that roundabout when she did. I'm not saying that he would have killed her or anything like that, just that he was already a woman beater and dangerous, so who's to say that he wouldn't have at least hurt her? I did talk to all 3 boys at one point or another that year when I would find their Instagrams. I don't think that I talked to the oldest though, but I tried to get in contact with just no luck. My classmate really didn't want to talk about it, but I tried my best to console him out of doing stuff. I don't want to put in too much detail about the kids, just for respect for them. But the youngest ran a whole account for his mum and would post just about the same picture every time that he was missing her, and I think he even wrote a book about it, although he was only 8 at the time. I have no idea where they are 5 years later, but I don't think they're in PO anymore. But let me finish by saying this. The mum, she was really sweet, and her boys were good kids. None of them deserved it, and I hope that that guy rots in hell. So I was about 16 years old, and at that time, very interested in ghosts, paranormal things, and stuff like that. My mum is, I wouldn't say a medium or anything, but highly esoteric and can see things in and around other humans. For example, she can feel bad energies and also describe dead loved ones of her customers standing beside her perfectly. And if you want to hear stories of my mum, just let me know. But her being so sensitive of those things did wake my interest even more. So I went online and researched on ways to communicate with spirits and energies and whatnot, and found out a way to do so. I invited my sister and 2 of our neighbors' kids to help and watch. I didn't want to do that alone because of obvious reasons. But we waited for my mother to leave because she prohibited specifically to ever communicate with the other world. But we wrote letters and numbers and also yes and no on a paper, cropped them out and arranged them in a circle. We basically crafted a Ouija board. We lowered the shutters in my room. Yes, we did that in my room, stupid I know, and lit candles and placed them in different places in my room. Me and my sister placed our hands on an upside-down drinking glass, and the neighbors' kids watched from the bed. The first few times they laughed and chuckled when we said phrases like, "Is someone here who wants to talk with us?" or "If you want to communicate, please do that." But after a few minutes, a few of the candles started to flicker, and I didn't think too much about it because, candles do flicker. But after some more time, some of them really started to freak me out. They started to look like someone trying to blow them out, in fact. You know, like when you want to blow out candles but don't use enough air, so you just blow the flame in one direction? They looked a lot like that. And then the glass started moving. I looked at my sister and she looked at me, simultaneously asking if the other one was pushing it. We both got really freaked out, so we took our hands off of the glass and that freaking thing moved all by itself. I got a panic attack and we all screamed and ran to my door to get out. We had actually closed it before we got in. In hindsight, it was a very stupid idea. But I pressed the handle of my door down, but it just didn't move, not an inch. My sister and the neighbor kids started to help pressing it down, and we leaned on it with all of our body weight, all combined, but it just didn't move an inch. And then the candles started to go out, and we just screamed, and eventually it opened, and we ran into the kitchen in a corner, and we just huddled together and cried. After that, we eventually calmed down, and things kind of went back to normal. From that day on, I never slept well in that room too, because I just felt watched all the time, and my writing desk chair started moving on its own as well. I placed it under the desk, and the next morning it stood a good meter away from it. My mum also noticed that my room just didn't feel right, like something lurks inside of it, and asked me if I did something stupid. Eventually I told her, and she was furious, saying that I could have brought much more evil in our apartment than a spirit that amuses itself by disturbing us. She said a ritual in my room, saying a few phrases and putting a protective circle around it and smoking it out with sage and whatnot, and after that, I was never disturbed by it again. Nevertheless, though, I won't be doing that again. I was in the kitchen the night before last, washing up some plates from dinner, when I glanced out the window in front of the sink and I saw someone standing at the far end of my yard. From what I could tell, it looked like a man of average build with a scruffy appearance. He was essentially behind my neighbour's tool shed, which is right on the border of my property, and so I thought that he might be somebody that they knew. It was dark though, and he was quite a distance away, so I couldn't really see what he was doing. His back was mostly turned to me as well, but by his movement, it looked like he was patting the ground with a shovel, as if he'd just buried something and was covering it up with dirt. This definitely raised my suspicions a bit, and so I called my neighbours to ask if they were aware that there was someone behind their shed. They said that they were not, and the husband went outside to investigate. I saw my neighbour open his door, and the man saw or heard it and bolted off into the woods. I went outside to meet my neighbour and see if there was evidence of what the man had been doing, so we both arrive at the same spot, and I tell the neighbour that the man fled, and the neighbour says that he saw him running away. We look down at the ground, and there is indeed fresh dirt where someone was digging. The neighbour gets the shovel, which the man dropped when he ran off, and starts digging it back up, nervously because we were both expecting something gruesome, no doubt. However, what we dug up has left us with more questions than answers. It was a plastic bag with something softball-sized and heavy inside. We dump out the contents, and it's a rock painted red and a small smiley face button on it, the kind you pin on your shirt. And why would somebody be out trespassing on someone's property in order to bury a painted rock and a button? And yes, it's definitely paint on the rock, not blood. It's not a murder weapon as far as we can tell. But still, the neighbours and I reported it to local law enforcement, and they came and they took a statement. They took the rock and the button too, just in case it turns out to be connected with a crime. The whole ordeal has me a bit on edge, to be honest, but why else would someone bury something like that in the dark? The police combed the woods last night too, and they did come across something which makes this whole thing even more unnerving. They found a spot about a mile behind our homes in the woods where it appears that someone may have been living. I live in a pretty small town in a more rural area, and a lot of people here hunt deer and turkeys and the like. The spot that they discovered apparently had been an old lean-to type shelter that had been used at one point for hunting, but probably had been abandoned for a while when whoever found it and decided to live there. In the spot there were some old blankets, a recently used fire pit someone had made, and a few other things like food and wrappers and plastic plates and a small cooking pot. There was also something, though, that freaked my neighbour and I out quite a bit. The guy had a portable kerosene heater unit, and it was the exact portable kerosene heater that went missing from my neighbour's shed almost a year ago. So at this point, we believe this guy has been living there for quite some time. However, no one in the area has reported to have seen anyone like him around, or had any other incidences so far, but police are still in the process of talking to the other neighbours in the area. It does appear that he's left the spot at this point, but there's no being certain that he won't return. In the meantime, I'm staying at my sister's in a neighbouring town, and my neighbours are staying with their adult children. My neighbour and I are going with the police escort back to our homes to set up security cameras and the like later today as well. I really don't want to go anywhere near there tonight, but it might be the only hope that we have of catching this guy and putting everyone's minds at ease. The police are taking this matter pretty seriously as well, because many years ago we had a case of a homeless man in the woods who attempted to abduct a young woman. So between that and being a small town, this sort of thing really rattles us a lot. They're trying to track down the film used for the camera, or where it came from rather, but they suspect that it may be an older camera and film, and if the man was homeless, it's likely that he just found it. As for the cause of death for the kitten that they found, they're running tests as we speak, but the vet's initial thought is that it looks like it was poisoned. This doesn't necessarily mean that it was killed intentionally. It could have just accidentally eaten something that someone set out as bait for rodents and whatnot, and the man could have just found it that way. Who knows? But it definitely hadn't been dead long when the man had it, because rigor mortis had not yet set in at the time. Meanwhile, too, the whole neighborhood is aware and have been alerted by authorities to be wary and keep their eyes peeled for anything or anyone suspicious. The police do believe that they may actually have a lead as well. A man fitting the general description of our guy is actually pretty familiar to the local gas station convenience store clerk, and as soon as the clerk heard about the incidences, he called the police to tell them about the guy. I also paid the clerk a visit this afternoon on my way back to my sister's house, after installing cameras at my neighbor's and my own residence, and I spoke with him personally. It seems the man would often come into the store to use their can and bottle return, and the clerk believed that that's how the guy was making his living, by picking up bottles and cans out of people's trash and recycling and then returning them for change. The clerk says that the man told him his name was Robert and went by the nickname Robbie. The clerk believes that Robbie does have mental health problems by the way that he acts and some of the things that he says as well. It appears he suffers from paranoid delusions, maybe. The clerk said that usually he only ever spoke in short sentences when spoken to and never made eye contact. However, the clerk overheard the man rambling and mumbling to himself while returning cans one day, repeating something over and over about cleaning the dirty water where all the people keep bleeding. Aside from that rather highly unnerving detail, the clerk said that Robbie seemed pretty much harmless. But here's something that definitely puts a bit of a twist into the story, and may put your minds a little at ease, though not much, about what happened to the kitten. So, the store clerk said that maybe 2 or 3 weeks prior to my initial encounter, the man Robbie had come to the store with some bags of cans and bottles. He also had a kitten with him. It fits the description of the one that we found. The kitten seemed healthy, but a little too skinny, and the man said that he had found it in the woods and thought that it was a stray. He asked the clerk to look after the kitten for a few minutes while he returned cans, and afterwards he purchased a small bag of dry cat food and a hot dog and cola for himself with the change. The clerk says the man seemed to really care for the kitten and even said, "He's my friend." And when the clerk asked him the cat's name, the man said that he was still thinking of one, but he thought that he might call him Frankie. But then he said something else that was definitely unnerving. Little babies, like Frankie, like kittens. Though it is possible that he meant that kittens are like little babies, and not that babies like kittens. I don't know. It's worded creepily either way. So now the police and myself are thinking this quite probably is a homeless, mentally ill man, and the kitten was in fact his pet. The tests have come back that the kitten had rat poison in his system, so we think someone in the area left rodent poison out in some food to bait raccoons. We have a serious raccoon problem here. They often get into the trash and make huge messes. The kitten probably wandered off in search of food and found the poison bait, ate it, and died unfortunately. The man probably thought that it was me and or my neighbor who had poisoned the cat, for whatever reason. Maybe the location he discovered it deceased was near us, or maybe he thought that it was on purpose because he had previously buried things in our yard, which we don't have any explanation for the first items yet. But I assure you that we are not the type of people to leave poison out for innocent animals to find. We have pets of our own, in fact. However, we know that a lot of people do bait and poison the raccoons here. Either way, I think it's possible this guy might not have been doing anything truly malicious the first time when he buried the rock in the pin. But the second time, it's possible that he was angry and did mean to threaten us, because he thinks that we killed his only friend and beloved pet. But that's just speculation, and nothing is set in stone at this time. I'll close by saying this, though. Even though this is still a very serious and frightening situation, and he is still considered highly dangerous, mostly to myself and my neighbors, because he may try to do more to take revenge for what he thinks that we did, I'm also incredibly heartbroken for this man if that indeed was his pet kitten. I honestly cannot blame him for his actions if he truly is mentally ill and mostly harmless as well. If that is indeed the case as well, I do hope that they find him and get him somewhere where he can get some help. Police are still questioning local shop owners and other citizens in the area for further information. They're also searching missing persons databases to see if anyone has reported anyone fitting Robbie's description as missing within recent years, to see if they can identify him and figure out possible current whereabouts. And until then, I'll continue to stay with my sister and my neighbors with their family for as long as I can, just to be out of harm's way. The newly installed security cameras have night vision and motion sensors as well, and they're active and recording. And so, I'll keep you guys posted. So I was very young when this happened, maybe 3 or 4 years old, so I'm guessing around 97 or 98. I know your mind can implant false memories, so I don't know if it actually happened or not, but I do remember it pretty vividly. So we were living in Germany, and I shared a room with my brother who's 4 years older than I am. The head of my bed was right below the only window in the room, and one night he jumped out of his bed and ran across the room to where I was to look out the window. And this is where things seemed weird, because it was like he knew that something was out there and he needed to see it, but there was no way that he could have seen or heard anything down there at all. I got up to see what the fuss was about, and down on the street below was a man stood completely still facing the road which stretched away from where we were. He was tall and broad, and he wore a suit, a long brown overcoat, and a fedora-type hat which made him look like someone from the 50s. But he also had no head. His hat just seemed to float. He turned and walked away from us down the street about 20 yards, stopped and turned to face the road again. 20 seconds later, he walks another 20 yards, and once again he stops and turns to the road. He did this 4 or 5 times over before he disappeared into the darkness as well. He never turned in our direction or in any other, apart from straight down the street and to the road. There were no cars or other people coming down the street when he was on it, and the atmosphere around him just seemed ghostly still, if that's the right way to say it. But the fact that my brother seemed to know that he was there is what weirds me out the most, as much as the fact that he seemed to have no head. Weirdly too, I don't remember feeling scared or intimidated. I felt more excited to see this headless man. It's one of the earliest memories that I have, and it's stuck with me ever since as well. I've never spoken to my brother about this, nor have I told anyone, but I'm wondering, has anyone else had a similar experience, or could this just all be in my head? I'm skeptical for the most part about the paranormal, so I just really don't know what to make of it. So this story and the background surrounding it is going to sound mildly insane, to put it simply, but I ask that you please try to keep an open mind. Growing up, I've always been more spiritually in tune than what could be perceived as normal. As I've gotten older, that hasn't really changed. I can go into so many stories about this too, such as dreams that I've had come true, or cases of sleep paralysis in which I've seen and felt things, an encounter with what I believe to be a demon, and so on and so forth. But for this, I'm going to start off with my earliest and most prominent memory of living in a haunted house for a 1.5 years. If anyone's interested, I'll tell my other stories too, but for now, to the haunted house. So, I was 12 at the time. My family had moved into a house built in the 1930s, set up in a neighborhood of matching and equally old houses in a long straight street. It was a fairly dark neighborhood with tall trees, and truth be told, it was almost a cliché horror setting. But being a sheltered Catholic girl, I didn't think anything of it. I was excited to live in this new house and make new friends, and the first day in the house was relatively normal. The movers would arrive the next day with all of our respective furniture, so for that day we had our mattresses, some plates, utensils and food, and I wasn't really bothered by the house at first, or maybe I was just too blinded by my excitement to really notice things. I don't know. But this all changed when night came. I went to my empty room where my mattress was, as well as a few personal items laid out, and started to make my bed. The layout of the room was fairly simple. My bed is in the right-hand corner of the room with the doorway right across from it. My closet was on the wall that my bed was pressed to, so I could see its trim and outline from my bed, but not inside of it, if that makes sense. The closet also had a door, and for whatever reason, the closet bothered me, even the first day. I can't really explain it, but I just didn't bother putting my clothes away as I was too uncomfortable with it. But weirdly, I also couldn't shut the closet door. I just didn't want to go near it, even if it meant giving myself comfort by not having it open. Like I said, I just can't explain it, and it gave me bad vibes, but being 12, I just kind of shrugged it off as standard anxiety. You know, oh my goodness, a closet's are scary, monsters are under the bed sort of stuff. I figured the fear would just go away eventually. When bedtime neared, though, I realized that I had no lamps in my room, with the only light being from the overhead fan. The thought of being in the room in total darkness definitely left me with a bad and terrible feeling, so I decided that I would sleep with my bed door open and the hallway light on as well. I didn't want my parents to assume that I was being babyish, so I justified it in case I woke up and needed to go to the bathroom, get water, etc. I didn't know the layout of the house, and I didn't want to fumble in the darkness to turn my light switch on. My parents understood, so great. At the time, I had a golden retriever who was the light of my life. She was my childhood dog who always slept in my room, usually on my floor or bed. And when I was ready for bed, I took a treat and I brought her in with me. I tried to bring her to my mattress with me, encouraging her with words and food. But as soon as she entered my room, she just whirled around and left. I tried to bring her in my room with me several times, but always to the same result. My mum said that the dog was probably just anxious due to the move, and in the end I accepted that. So I just tried to sleep alone that night. But I couldn't sleep though. I laid in my bed, bundled in my blankets. Coming from a conservative Catholic family, my brain never once jumped to the idea of ghosts or spooky things. I had no idea what I was feeling, but one thing was just crystal clear. Though I was alone, I truly didn't feel like I was. I glanced periodically towards my closet, noting how it felt as if something was peering around the corner at me. I didn't see anything, but it felt as if something was there and watching me. I could only stare back before trying to fall asleep, and sleeping in that room was just impossible. After we received our furniture, though, I immediately set up my lamp on my desk on the end of the room that I would use as a nightlight. I refused to sleep in my room in darkness. Bear in mind, though, that I had outgrown sleeping with a nightlight by 6, so being 12 years old and insisting my light be on for me to sleep warranted eye rolls from my parents. They thought that I was being ridiculous, especially since I had no explanation as to why. How could I explain what I was feeling? I couldn't, because I didn't even understand it. But in the end, they didn't argue with me, and they just let me do it. By night, I'd turn my lamp on, burrow myself into my blanket, and just try to ignore that terrible feeling of something watching me. I didn't put any clothes in my closet, and I kept it in my dresser, even if it didn't make sense for dresses, jackets, and so on. I put a Harry Potter poster on the door to make it friendlier, as if a protective barrier to provide comfort. And I remember one night, I was laying on my side just staring at the wall. I was curled up and bundled in my blankets in my safe burrito form, only my face peeking out so that I could breathe. And for whatever reason, something compelled me to look up, so I did. And in a slow, almost leisurely movement, I saw the shadow of what looked to be a person move across the wall. I didn't process it fully at the time. I tried to justify it in the moment as being the fan's shadow, but as an adult, I look back and I honestly shudder recalling the distinct features of a nose, a chin, and even a hunched back. Another night, curled in my bed, I thought that I saw movement at the end of it, a shadow really ducking downwards, and I don't know what compelled me to do this, honestly. Maybe 12-year-old me was brave or an idiot, but I pulled myself out of my burrito form and moved across my bed to peer down at the end of it, as if I would see someone hunched there, or my dog, or anything. When I did, I saw nothing, of course. But the shadow was just so distinct and so dark, and I knew something had to have been there. I curled back into my blankets and I tried to sleep. One other night, though, this time not in my room, I went to my parents' bedroom to retrieve some cough medicine from their cabinet when I heard something so distinct that it gave me pause. There was a tap from inside the walls, and this took me off guard, so I turned to look to the wall where it was coming from. The tapping persisted, quiet and slow at first, but gradually began to build in sound. This may sound ridiculous, but I'm willing to put my hand on a Bible and swear on my soul, but I swear to you that I saw the walls move, as if something was pressing against it. It slithered up the wall and into the ceiling as if trying to break out, and as if the wall were made of softer substance. I began to sob and I ran downstairs. My dad was away on a business trip and my mum was asleep on the couch. She had taken some medication because we were both sick, so she was passed out cold. I tried to shake her awake, begging her to wake up, telling her that I believed someone was upstairs, but she just wouldn't budge. I ran upstairs back to her room and the horror persisted. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I ran into my parents' bed, burrowed under the covers, and I could have run, but being in my room was no comfort, and I was afraid of every other room in the house, so I stayed under the covers until the tapping stopped, and then I dragged my dog into the room with me and shut the door. And that night, she just cried and whined the whole night, sometimes pawing at my door, but I was too afraid of being alone, and I cried myself to sleep that night. Something lived in that house, and I don't know what it was or if there was more than one thing. But when I reflect on living in that place, I also reflect on how every night was just a hellish nightmare, and how every sleepover at a friend's house away from it was a breath of fresh air. Moving from that house gave me great relief, but we moved into a new home for a while that was beautiful and bright, and I slept like I'd never slept before that first night, safely and with relief. And my dog even slept in my room with me willingly that night too. But that old house, I'll never, ever forget it, and its other occupants. To preface this, I'm a 30-year-old wife, mother, and Marine Corps veteran. I practice and help instruct Taekwondo and Krav Maga, and honestly, never in a million years did I expect something like this would ever happen to me. But last night, it did, and I hope that this is the right place to get this off my chest. So last night, I went to Walmart's to do some grocery shopping. On my way into the store, I noticed a shady-looking beat-up grey sedan circling around the parking lot and not parking. I found it odd, but brushed it off and went into the store. After I finished shopping, I came out of the store and noticed the same car still circling. It was odd for sure, but not enough to make me put up my guard or anything. I unloaded my groceries in the car, took the cart back to the cart corral, and when I entered my car, I got a really strong urge to immediately lock my doors, even before I started my car. And almost instantly after I did this, that same sedan whipped up, partially blocked me in so that the only way that I could get out was to reverse. And it was a middle-aged man, and his window was rolled down, and he was yelling at me. What made me nervous, though, is that both of his hands were in his pockets. I couldn't be sure if he was just weird and cold, or if maybe he had something in those pockets. So I didn't want to take my eyes off of his hands, which made it hard for me to back up. So I rolled down my window an inch and asked him what he needed. Stupid, I know. But he said that he needed help and that he couldn't hear me well, so could I open my door? I asked him what he needed help with, and he started yelling at me to just open my effing door. At that point, I put my car in reverse and chanced a glance at my backup camera, during which time he had gotten out of his car and was now at my door, trying to yank at the handle, still yelling at me to open my door. I tore out of there so fast that I'm surprised I wasn't actually stopped by the cops. I found a crowded, well-lit parking lot and instantly called the police, who thankfully took me seriously and went to take a look. But by that time, the man was long gone. I know nothing happened, and perhaps I shouldn't still be shaken up over it, but that encounter just really shook me, and I just wanted to share this, so thanks for listening. So, before I get into this story, I know the generic answer to these stories is sleep paralysis, and although I do have that issue sometimes, this is definitely different. So when I'm on my way to sleep and I finally find a comfortable position to lay, I usually can only sleep if I'm faced towards the middle of the bed. This thing will come up and I can feel my bed react to something climbing onto it because it sinks down a bit. It then proceeds to just kind of lean over me and breathe as close to my face as possible, and I can literally feel it. When I don't react to that, open my eyes for instance, I can feel it get off the bed from behind me and get back onto the other side so that we're face to face. I know this because I can feel the bed react again to it getting on the other side and now feel the breathing right in front of my face instead of over me. Plus, you know when someone gets really close to your face and you can feel the heat coming off of their face? I can feel that too, and lastly, with still no reaction from me, it gets off the bed again, but I know it's still there, just from that feeling that you get from someone staring at you. Now, like I said, I know that there's a lot of people who would think that, of course, this is just sleep paralysis. The whole story is pretty generic to exactly that for the most part. But this is why I don't think that that's what it is, because I can move. I'm not immobile, and it doesn't feel like anything is holding me down. I know that I can move because I'm so used to sleep paralysis that I know how to check for it, as this is how I usually transition to a lucid dream. That's a whole different story. Also, the way that I sleep, I have one hand under me, usually under my pillow, so I just open and close my hand a few times to confirm that I can actually move. This works for me in my head because if there is something there, I can move a little without it knowing. I then move my legs up to get into a fetal position just to make sure that my feet are not hanging off the end of the bed. Too many stories regarding that. But now that I know that I can move, this is where I start to get nervous because now I have to actively try to keep my eyes closed since I've confirmed that I'm actually awake, and it seems to be right in front of my face at this point. I can literally feel the sweat coming out of my pores and my entire upper body because I'm just so nervous. What I've done the last few times when I know it's not on the bed anymore and I'm drenched in sweat to the point that I need to move off of the sweat spot, I just say screw it and I jump up from the bed and yell as if that's going to do anything, but when I do though, of course, there's always nothing there. I'm 31 years old and this isn't new to me. I have a theory that it might be related to a lady that sometimes haunts my dreams. Since I was in pre-K, that's another story for another time again. It also has crossed my mind that it could be my dad. That's actually worse than the first option to me. Again, another story for another time. But anyway, what do you guys think this is? And can you shed any light on the situation? It was an October night at about 9 p.m. and I had spent a long day working as a hostess at a restaurant. One of my friends had asked me to help them out with getting a lot of liquor for a party that was being thrown. Because I didn't really have time to get it all in one shopping trip, I went to 3 different liquor stores in a matter of 3 days, one each day. I ended up spending $180 on the liquor altogether. They said that they would pay me after I got it because they had no idea how much all of it would cost and that they would even add a tip, which I was fine with. At the first liquor store that I went to, I hauled out the rest of the order to my car, and this liquor store is in a very suburban area, so I felt completely safe and I'd been there countless times. As I'm putting the liquor into my trunk of my used cop car, I see out of the corner of my eye 2 men looking around and walking towards me. I act like I don't see them and mind my business, but keep my peripheral gaze on them because I never fully let my guard down. "Hey, could you give me a ride home?" one of the men asked in a black hoodie. I said, "I'm actually very busy tonight and I have stuff that I gotta do when I get home." Trying to be as nice as I can, I add, "There's a light rail just over there though, and it's also where buses circulate." He came back at me with, "Well, I don't really know where I'm going." So I told him, "Yeah, there's some maps over there by the light rail to show you its path." He just looks at me with his friend, and then they pull up bandanas over their faces, only revealing their eyes, and he pulls up his shirt, which reveals a gun in his waistband. I'm so stunned that I can't respond. All that's going through my head is, oh my goodness, my parents are going to kill me for getting this car stolen. Eventually his friend says, "I don't think she thinks we're serious, man. Put the gun to her head." He put the gun to my head, and this wave of shock hit my body, and it just doesn't feel real. A couple of seconds pass, and my brain sort of starts functioning again, and I hand over my keys. As they're trying to figure out how to get into my car, I just kind of stand there frozen, not able to comprehend that my car is being stolen by these men for 10 seconds. They take a good 30 seconds to figure out how to turn the car on and learn the controls, and while that's happening, I'm just standing still as a rock because I'm thinking that they're about to shoot me if I started to run, but then my mind tells me to run because they could take me with them and hold me hostage or God knows what. I was holding my purse, which had my whole life in it, and I know it wasn't a good idea to do this, but it was so convenient. It had all my medications, money, and everyday things that I need while I'm doing stuff. I was trying my best to keep it out of sight in the back of me. All of these thoughts are rushing through my head for the next 20 seconds when, all of a sudden, another man runs out of the store as the car is driving away and he hops into the back of it. While I watch them drive away quickly, I slowly walk towards the liquor store, and as soon as they're out of my sight, I start running to tell the liquor store employees about the incident while my body was shaking. I tell the store manager, lock the door, my car was just stolen at gunpoint. This man then has the audacity to ask me, what if we have customers? The employee, freaking out, runs towards the door to lock it, yelling, "Oh my goodness, what? This never happens here, this is crazy. What happened exactly?" I try to tell her while my body was shaking, my voice was shaking, and I start tearing up because of the shock. As I'm telling her this, she picks up the phone and she tells me to call the police right away. The police come in less than a minute, and I give them my statement. The man that I told the story to says, "Yeah, this sort of thing happens a lot, unfortunately, and it's very rare that we find whoever's done it. It's hard to determine what will happen to your car as well. We'll just have to wait and see." Which makes me feel so much better about everything. I tried calling my mum, father, and brother. No one picked up as I cried. I laughed a little bit because, of course, this type of thing would only happen to me. Although he had work early in the morning, I called my boyfriend because I didn't want to ride home in a police car. I needed to be with someone that I knew and could talk to about this with. When he picked up, he'd been asleep and got annoyed with me at first, but then I explained the gist of what had happened so I'd be able to explain and go more in depth in person. In the end, he didn't actually come in time, so I got driven home by the cops and he met me at my house. Shortly after we got to my house, my parents got home and were in shock hearing about what had happened. We all sat around and talked about it until my boyfriend had to go home to get a proper amount of sleep. The next day, I decided that I had to drop my class that I wasn't doing well in to begin with because there was no way that I was bouncing back after that. I just needed some time to recuperate. I told my friend about all the liquor that was stolen, and by that I mean all $180 worth of liquor was stolen. And they told me that they felt so bad that they put me through that, and I just told them, "Look, it's not your fault, but I just spent $180 of my own money for you guys, and as long as you pay me back for it, I'll be fine." There was a good amount of people that were chipping into this party, and some of them didn't even want to give me money because they believed it wasn't their fault that I was dumb enough to get my car stolen, so why even give me money for liquor that I didn't have? Eventually, they scraped up the money, though, and they paid me back a couple of days later. 5 days later, they found my car ditched on the side of the road in the city. I had my car thoroughly cleaned after the incident, and I picked it up. And when I got my car back, I realized pretty quickly that these men had stolen everything. Even my expensive textbooks that I'd left in my car for school that I was going to return. I pushed down all my emotions for so long that a week later, I kind of had an emotional breakdown, and I still am not the same after this whole event. So, this may not be that bad compared to many others, but a man has followed me around the store 5 times now, and for background, I can only really go to the store late at night around 9 or 10 due to my job. I know it isn't safe, but I always carry a taser or pepper spray on me for things just like this. I'm also only 5 feet tall and pretty petite. He's probably at least 6 feet tall and over double my size. So, it started sometime last year. A man walked up to me while I was in self-checkout and started asking me typical questions, like asking if I had a boyfriend, telling me that he noticed me walking around and he needed to tell me that I was pretty, things like that. I lied and said that I had a boyfriend just for my own safety, and took the compliment, and I didn't think anything weird of it. Until it happened again and again. Every time he used the exact same script in the exact same order and always finds me in a very closed-off space. The first 3 times, he never even had anything in his hands to buy. The second time that I was sitting on the floor of the makeup aisle, totally vulnerable, he said the same thing as the first time, and I politely told him that I still do have a boyfriend, but thank you. And that was that. I just thought of it as kind of coincidence. The third time it happened, though, I was in the very corner of the store by the vegetables with nobody near me. He says the exact same thing as the first 2 times, so I finally had to tell him, "You've come up to me 3 times now. Every single time you've talked to me, I've told you no. I need you to leave me alone. Do not come up to me again." The 4th time it happened, we passed each other and he realized it was me, so he circled around and followed me into the medicine aisle and pretended to look at the bottles. Every time I took a step to the side, he would too, and at that point, as soon as I saw him, I called up a friend so I would have somebody that could hear what was happening and try to scare him off. I turned the corner and I could hear him calling out for me, so I started walking faster. Believe it or not, I ended up running into a police officer in uniform, and even though he was busy and I felt bad for interrupting, I asked him for help. The officer walked me to the self-checkout when the man actually had the nerve to pick the counter right next to me. The officer walked me out to my car and I could see the guy was watching me in the parking lot. But the last interaction happened just a couple of minutes ago. So I was looking for something for dinner and walked out of the frozen food across to the makeup, and guess who walked past me at the same time? We crossed paths and I kept walking and checking over my shoulder. He was still watching me, and I freaked out a bit and I hid in the makeup aisle and poked my head out, and sure enough, he was looking up and down the aisles to see where I went. I texted my mum and a friend because I didn't know what to do. But when I saw him turn, I went to find a manager, but I could hear his keys following behind me. The manager walked me to the checkout, and once again, he picked the counter next to mine. The manager walked me out and he trailed behind me, and again watched me get into my car. I did a couple of circles to make sure nobody was following me and drove home. But I've got to ask you guys, am I being stupid and just overreacting? It's happened 5 times now, and after the 3rd time it happened, I reported him to a different manager, and he told me that if he's ever in the store again, he'll be removed and banned, but that particular manager wasn't there tonight. So, where do I go from here? The officer that helped me even told me that, unfortunately, he couldn't do more than just walk me out. I know I shouldn't go so late, but it's the only time that I can, so I don't know what to do. So this is a bit of a weird one. Years ago, I worked in a supermarket in a small town. It was a pretty hellish place to work, so many of the employees banded together and were really friendly with each other. One of my co-workers, Ben, wasn't the kind of guy that I would usually be friends with, but he was pretty funny in a kind of quirky, offbeat kind of way, and he helped make the day go faster, so it was good. He and I were still friendly with each other, and when I left for an office job, he hugged me goodbye on my last day. Cut to several years later, one of mine and Ben's mutual friends posted an article on Facebook and said, "I can't believe I used to be friends with this piece of shit." I read the article and my stomach just turned cold. It was a news story about how Ben had gone to prison for aggressively murdering his infant son and then tried to cover up what he had done. I was pretty disturbed and couldn't believe that I had once been friendly with someone who could do such a thing. Even more years passed and I moved to a different county and a different job. I now work in an office that has a warehouse attached. I work in the office, but the warehouse has a really high turnover. People leave or are fired, get hired all the time. And one day I hear the office door open and the guy says that he's come to start working in the warehouse. It's the first day and I look over my shoulder and to my horror, I realize this guy could be Ben. He looks older and rougher than the last time that I saw him, but it could definitely be him. I ask for the new guy's name, and yep, it's Ben. I didn't want to spread gossip or start a panic or anything, but I felt that I had to say something. Many of the office employees bring their children to work some days, and even though I doubt Ben is now in the business of just killing random children, how do I know what he is or isn't capable of? I spoke to the warehouse manager, who was horrified to learn the truth. I showed him the article about what Ben had done, and the warehouse manager told me that Ben had lied in his application and said that he had no criminal convictions. He was fired immediately and was escorted out of the office. This is a bit of a long one, but bear with me. So my mum has always had spirits or haunts in her life, but most of them bad as well. They seem to follow her right from childhood and every house that she lived in, and this is just one of those stories, but there are many, many more. My mum and I were out shopping one day and we ended up at a local thrift store. They had this deal where they showcased upcoming items behind glass, and if you liked something, you had to come back for it the day that it would be going on sale. This was a big attraction because, well, of course, they showcased the best items that they had donated to them, and on the sale day, people were lined up at the door to be the first one to buy a coveted item. So, we were looking at the items on display, and my mum pointed out a porcelain doll, a clown. I looked at it, and immediately, my whole body shuddered and became goosebumps. I've always had a bit of a sixth sense for these things, and this clown gave me a huge case of the willies. I told her it wasn't a good clown. My mum was completely enamored with it though. I warned her that I got a bad feeling from it and please don't buy it. But 2 weeks later, I went to her house and I ended up on her back deck, and sitting in one of those deck chairs was that damn clown. I went inside and said, "Mum, how could you? I told you that thing gave me the creeps." She told me that she was drawn to it, so the day it went on sale, she headed up to the store early and stood in line. And no one else seemed interested in it, so she took it as a sign that she was meant to have it. I asked her why it was sitting outside, and she said that my nephew Jay was seriously weirded out by it and begged her to get rid of it. Jay has lived with his grandmother his entire life, and at the time he was about 16 years old. I asked Jay about it, and he asked me if I liked it. I told him the truth. He said Mum wouldn't get rid of it, but did put it outside. He also said, "You sense there's something wrong with it too, right? Did you notice that no matter what direction you're looking at it from, it seems to be looking back at you?" That definitely had gone unnoticed by me. Fast forward a week or so though, and I noticed the clown was no longer sitting in the chair outside, so I asked my mum about it. She said our entire family was hating on it, so she got rid of it. I felt somewhat relieved that it was gone, but the house just felt different. Being she was touching on the subject, though, I just kind of dropped it. But that wasn't the end of it, though. So my mum was also raising my niece Amy, who was just over a year old at the time. I would go over to visit, and Amy never wanted to be in her room, and I would go in there to grab some toys, and she just wouldn't walk over the threshold. She just stayed in the hallway, and when I asked her to help me to take the toys into the living room, she would just shake her head no. I thought that she was just being that age, and I left it alone. But then she became suspicious of an antique wardrobe that sat in her room. When it was bedtime, I would take her in and she would stare at it warily, and then she would look at me, put her finger over her lips and cryptically say, "Shush," and point to the wardrobe. And after that, she didn't want to be left in her room alone, so bedtime became difficult trying to rock her to sleep while she fussed. Another week passed though, and my mum called and asked me to come over. I said sure, and I drove to her house, and she said, "Something really scared me last night." Now, she'd been in bed for only about 5 minutes, laying on her side, when she felt a heaviness descend behind her onto the bed. That tired feeling left her immediately as she became hyper-alert. She wasn't quite sure what to do and was trying to decide when a male body came up behind her and pressed himself with his erect penis into her back. It put its legs over her and an arm around her torso. She froze in fear, not quite knowing what to do and trying to comprehend what was going on. She knew that she had locked all the doors just moments before heading to bed, so had someone come into the house with evil intent? She said that she put her hand on the man's hand that was over her torso when her finger felt very long and pointy fingernails at the end of its 3 fingers and a thumb. She could feel breath on the back of her neck, and she knew that it was waiting for her to make the next move. She struggled to get up, but it held her fast and wouldn't let her move. She knew that she had to think quick, and she mustered up her best pissed-off voice and firmly said, "Let go of me." He just pressed harder and held her tighter though. Louder this time, with real anger in her voice, she said, "Get off of me, you bastard." She kicked and struggled, and finally it let go of her. She jumped out of bed, immediately flicked on the light to find nothing but her empty bed. She looked on the other side of the bed, underneath it, in the closet, everywhere. She even went through the entire house, checking her grandkids' rooms before looking in every closet and cranny in the house, only to find that no one else was there but her family, with the door still locked from the inside. I was obviously shocked. I didn't know what to say. My mum has never been one to make up stories, especially like that, so I really had no choice but to believe her. I knew she hadn't dreamt it, but I also just didn't understand why. But I'm also acutely aware that spirits seem to follow her and our entire family from house to house as well, so this wasn't totally out of the ordinary for our family. Another week passed with odd things happening. There'd be a mug placed on the kitchen counter to fill with coffee, but when Jay turned around with the pot to fill it, it was just no longer there. He would look around and finally find the mug down the hall in the bathroom or something. Amy also would not enter her room without an adult, then cower while pointing at the closet or the wardrobe. And there were constant oddities like that, but things finally came to a head one night. So my mum called me in the morning again and asked if I could come as soon as possible. She sounded quite frantic, so I headed over immediately. Amy was watching a kids program in the living room, so my mum could speak to me in the kitchen. And she said something really bad had happened the night before. She was sitting in the living room, getting Amy ready for bed, when she heard a loud slam against the wall down the dark hallway where Amy's room was. They both immediately became stiff and stared down towards her room. My mum said that whatever was coming down the hall towards them made a loud flapping sound that got louder the closer it got to them. My mum hugged Amy to her tightly as a pair of enormous black wings came barreling at them, then paused at the entrance to the stairs by the kitchen, pivoted, and loudly shrieked as it spiraled down the stairs into the basement. Stunned, my mum and Amy sat there for a moment, not moving or saying anything. Finally, Amy wriggled away from Grandma, cautiously made her way towards the stairs, and looked down. And when Amy turned to Grandma, she pointed down the stairs and whispered, "Shush," and my mum all but lost it. Amy slept on the couch that night, while my mum slept in her easy chair, and my mum was shaking by the end of the story, and she had tears in her eyes. She said to me, "I need you here because I have to do something important." She went down to the hallway to Amy's room, and I heard the closet door open, and when she came back, cradling the clown doll in her arms, I swore at her. Amy saw the clown and ran to me frantically, saying shush, 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 and was crying in fear. My mum said that she needed to take the doll out front to throw it out, but first she was going to smash that porcelain head to bits. When she went outside, Amy clung to me in tears. My mum knew that Amy was going to need me when she went outside with the clown. Again and again, my mum slammed the clown's head against the pavement, but no matter how many times or even how violently she did it, it just would not break. After many attempts to shatter the head failed, my mum defeatedly buried it in the garage can that would be picked up the next day. She couldn't do anything else at that point but just have it gone from their life. Later, I asked her why she kept it, and she said that it just felt right buying it and she absolutely adored it, but the rest of us were creeped out by it, with good reason, obviously. She said that she put it at the top of Amy's closet one day when Amy was at daycare, and she had covered it so that it wouldn't be seen when I went in there. I hadn't seen it, and neither did Amy, but I definitely felt something was off in the house every time I went over. She had assured me that it was gone, so I trusted her, but Amy felt it too, and was scared by what resided not only in her closet, but also in the wardrobe. Jay felt it and experienced strange things as well, but nothing compared to those black wings and the thing in my mum's bed. Needless to say, all the weird stuff, it stopped after that. My mum has always trusted my intuition, and hers was certainly off that day in the thrift shop. But I always say, we always choose what's familiar to us. When you live in haunted houses your whole life, that becomes your normal. However abnormal that may seem to others. And the normalcy my mum felt when she saw that damn clown felt good somehow, no matter how much the rest of us felt the evil it possessed.